Hello, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here today with yet another tournament report, but we've got kind of a special thing going on for you guys, as we're not only talking about one of the biggest tournaments, grand tournaments that we actually have here in the Netherlands, the Alliance Open Dutch Masters, which has also been covered by a few other channels as far as I'm aware. But we have a special guest today. In addition to being myself and Nick here, we've also got the tournament organizer himself, Tom Megens, who's joining us to talk about the tournament in kind of a broader sense than we're used to talking about here. So maybe this will be even more interesting for you guys out there that don't want to just hear about how Nick and I did, but also a little bit more about tournaments in general, the organizing of said tournaments, and you know, maybe a different perspective of someone who actually will be, spoiler warning here, running the AOS Worlds Tournament this year here in the Netherlands. So, welcome, Tom. How are you doing today?
Hey, man. Yeah, I'm doing good. Doing good. Had a bit of a long day, but excited to be on the podcast. So, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. You know, you're one of the people that actually checks into the videos from the scene. I don't try to advertise it too much because I don't want to over inundate people with stuff. But when you asked me when the next video was coming out, I was like, in addition to wanting to let you know we were running a little behind on these things, I also thought you made for a totally logical guest. Usually I'm thinking about someone who played in the tournament, but obviously you were running it, and who better to have on? So also we've got Nick here, and the three of us had a great time at the tournament, hanging out as well, just in between the first day and second day. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be back, ready to talk about this tournament.
Yeah. So let me go on to the next slide here. And as normal, we've got a summary slide here with the tournament review, the army list, matchups, and conclusion. But looking at things in more detail here, we've swapped out some of our normal topics here to have, starting with the TO's perspective. And so before we get into the lists and everything itself, I wanted to just pick Tom's brain a little bit and see kind of what he can add to the discussion. A lot of our listeners probably are more casual or play more amongst their friends, even if they are super competitive, and they might not be doing tournaments that often. So I always feel like having a talk like this with an actual TO who knows what he's talking about on the scene and has a lot of experience could help talk people into that world a little bit more and get them a little more familiar with what actually goes on, not just hearing from one or two perspectives that were inside the event itself. So as I said, our guest is Tom Megens, and I've listed here, he's one of a handful of tournament organizers in the Netherlands. We don't have too large of a scene, but I would say it's pretty active, and considering that the Netherlands is not a super large country in as it concerns you know, actual geographic area, it's pretty easy if we have a tournament in one of our cities for most people that really want to be involved to go. Tom, how much of a representation would you say that we have from the AOS community in the Netherlands? Sometimes I feel like we don't have representation from the north as much as the rest, but I imagine you probably have a better sense for it than the rest of us.
Yeah. So I think we have about 100 competitive tournament players who would probably play one or two tournaments per year. So that's not a lot, but like we don't have that many here. So I guess it's a good metric to use. But like you're saying, from the north, like a couple of years ago, before COVID, I saw some guys from Groningen coming down to play. But I think since then, since one of the big stores that used to be in the south actually went to the north, we've seen them less and less, maybe because they can play locally in the store some more, or yeah, but they're a little bit closed off from the rest. And then actually, compared to the rest, I think we've got people from all over, from the south, the east. Well, obviously, because everything, like you said, everything is like a 1.5 hour drive to Utrecht, where we host most of our events, where I host most of my events, so to speak. I think it's pretty accessible. Like we even have people complain like, "Oh, it's an 1.5 hour drive." Like, and then when you go to the States or like down under or something, right? They have to take like a flight to almost every event, so it's crazy.
Right. Yeah, it's I think for some people, maybe at least those of us that live in one of the bigger cities and don't have maybe a car or easy access to a car, the next thing that always comes to mind for tournament players that you don't think about in the States very often, since everyone there has a car, is getting all your models safely from point A to point B. Do you feel like the Dutch community is particularly aware of good methods of transporting things if they don't have an auto? Or do you have a sense for that? I mean, when I came, I was originally planning on just moving everything around in a box, but then I realized magnetic trays were pretty much the only way to do it. Do you feel like that's a thing that keeps people from going to tournaments, or do you think it's more just the pressure of the tournament itself?
Good question. I think because you bought a couple models for me, like when I'm not sure if that was when you first started out, but and I brought them two in a bin with like a magnetic tray as well. And I think that's how most people start out, right? With like a plastic, like Tupperware bin or whatever, like a big one, and then put in like a sheet. But I also see, like, I even see Dennis Hulshoff, one of our local regular tournament goers. He just brings like a food tray, and he just like rams all the models on there, like no magnets, nothing. Everything is just like one big pile of models, and he just walks around the venue and then has to like declutter all his models at the table again. So I think we could improve some more. We're not that experienced as a community yet. But on the other hand, like 1.5 years ago, I think we bought, with like 11 or 12 guys, we all bought like this big A case together, and then I start seeing those more.
Are those from Poland?
But yeah, I think you're right.
Which country does A case come from? Yeah, Poland, yeah.
I think Polish or Czech.
And Nick, I know you've got a case too that you actually flew to the States recently. You've got your own bigger case, and you borrowed one that I think you gifted to one of our buddies, Luke. What is the experience that you've had flying with such a case? We're going to have a bunch of people coming in for Worlds not too far in the future here. Do you feel like that's an easy enough thing to do on an airplane, or is that kind of a prohibitive experience to keep people from being able to come?
It was like a yes and no to that to answer that question. So it was pretty straightforward after I got through security. I anticipated the moment, but I wasn't quite ready for it when it finally happened, because obviously my bag got flagged, and then they don't know what the fuck this is, so they grab my bag upside down. I'm like, oh, okay, I magnetized it, but let's. And then so you're not supposed to touch your bag when they're doing things. So I'm like, can I like, sir, back away? I'm like, oh. And so they finally.
It's just bats in there.
It's just little, and then so they're like, I was like, please just. I felt so weird. I was like, please be gentle, please. And so they apparently when it got banged around when they picked it upside down, so they started already falling out. All my ghouls were like, let us out! And so they're like, what is this? And I was like, I could just take the trays out and they'll look at it. And they were like, it was like they had never, it was wild. I mean, obviously they had never seen it before, but it was just like, so I had to sit there, and then of course you have to do the questions of like, what is this? I'm like, well, it's a game. It's a game. What kind of game? And I'm like, I am late for my flight. I don't have time to explain the whole minutia of Warhammer to you.
Yeah.
But eventually got through, put it all back to how I needed it, and then getting it on the plane was fine. It perfectly fits no matter what luggage size plane you're on. I had done both, like the small one where I kind of had to tip it on its side, and then I had the one business that's like fit it however you want. It was really straightforward. I didn't have a lot of turbulence, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but I mean, with magnets you're pretty much okay. I made it both ways when I went to LVO with no brakes. I had more brakes on the table than I did actually traveling with them, so that was reassuring.
Nice. That didn't have anything to do. That didn't have anything to do with the time you couldn't get access to any lunch, so you had to just make it up with beer, did it?
There's a really good chance that those are related.
So you didn't tell customs it was just plastic wrap?
No, not this time. Nice. I will definitely give that a go for the next one. I don't feel like going to the States is the best way to do that joke. Sure. Maybe somewhere where they don't care, like if I'm in Ireland or something, like fuck off.
Right.
It'd be great.
It's a drug. It's addictive.
Yeah, it's something.
It is, yeah.
It's ruined my life for sure.
Oh, no.
Well, maybe not my life, but certainly my posture.
Oh. Well, stop being so tall, and then maybe.
Yeah, there's that.
So, Tom, the next thing I've got mentioned here is that you were involved in AOS Worlds last year, which is in the Czech Republic. This is something I'm not 100% clear on. What was your kind of responsibility there in contrast to this year? Is it exactly the same? I imagine that you're more involved this year since we're hosting it. Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So what happened was they had a head ref last year from France, but because of obligations with his study, he decided to drop out like half February. While the event was in May, sorry. So then one of the Italian referees kind of took over his responsibilities, but he had a team of refs that weren't that experienced yet. So they were trying to find someone who could assist with some of the things. So I came in, and to be honest, because the other guy already planned on leaving for a while, it was a bit of a mess. Some of the stuff wasn't picked up. Some of the stuff they thought he'd already done hadn't been done at all. So I kind of came in, and together with Charlie, the Italian ref, we kind of took over a little bit, and we started making. I made the terrain maps. We started the FAQ together for Worlds, and then it kind of went from there to making sure the list checking went okay, because last year all the teams had to check each other's lists. This year it will be different. Shit. So so that was Anyway, so it was just picking up where the other guy, I wanted to say left off, but he didn't do that much up until that point. So we actually had to do a lot. And this year, Charlie has taken a little bit of a step back because they didn't really had a rules lead anymore because the other guy left and they didn't appoint a new one. So after each Worlds, there's a voting for who gets into the council, who becomes the rules lead, etc. And apparently they all voted for me. So
nice.
Now,
congratulations.
yeah, thanks. So now I have this job. So I'm kind of like the lead, the rules lead. But because I'm also organizing it here, that you don't have to be the head rules lead to organize it, or vice versa. So last year it would be a French rules lead initially, even though the event was in Prague. But now I am the TO and the rules lead, so it's a little bit much sometimes. But that's what changed from last year, is that I now am also the host.
Yeah, and so I imagine that's a lot of work on top of a real, like, quote unquote, real job. Maybe tell everyone what you do in your actual working hours. What do you spend most of your time doing?
Yeah, so my boss thinks no. I'm I'm an account manager, so I for audiovisual equipment. So I help companies to pick the right audiovisual equipment for their meeting room. So like video conferencing, big auditoria, theater, stuff like that. So I travel to customers, clients, and then I try to do some consultancy and make sure they purchase the right equipment.
Nice. Yeah, you can definitely see how that would connect. The skill set that you build doing that would connect with hosting something like this, and even just on the regional level that we have here. I imagine that some places have a hard time getting an active tournament scene going because of kind of the uphill battle of trying to get all the terrain going and renting the right places, getting the food sorted, checking all the rules, all the stuff that is involved, plus things I'm not thinking about. What would you say some of the you wish you had knowns before you had started tournament organizing would have been? Like, what's something that could have made your life way easier if you could travel in time and have told yourself otherwise?
Let's see. Start everything well in advance. That's one thing I learned for Worlds. So the terrain maps, we had to make them last minute. We had to make the FAQ last minute. And now with the ref panel that I started last year with some of the biggest TOs in the world, I already have an active FAQ that's going with 5 other refs, where we send in questions, we answer them, we put them on the website, and then I can use that for Worlds as well. So I had to my time management. That's, I think, the most important thing. And when you're starting out as a TO, the hardest part is actually finding a suitable venue, especially in the Netherlands, where like square meters are pretty expensive. Like I think in the US, you could, I think the compared to here, relatively, I think the rent would be a lot lower because they have a lot of square meters, a lot of space, a lot of big buildings as well, big venues. And here, not so much. So, and then there's the problem when you're hosting a Warhammer tournament that, let's say normally when you do a party or a wedding or whatever, you'd have like 200 guests in like 300 square meters, for example. Mm-hmm. But for Warhammer, it's completely different. You only have like a handful of people per square meter compared to a party or a wedding or whatever. But the prices you get from the venues, they are calculated to like a much higher amount of people. So
right.
It just doesn't add up most of the time here. So finding a venue was really, really hard.
Sure. Yeah, and I know that some people get frustrated with the cost of different things. And for example, I know that just as it works out, the cost of doing AOS Worlds last year was less expensive than the cost of doing it here in the Netherlands this year. Like but that said, and Nick, we can both speak to this. Warhammer is an expensive hobby. And if you're playing it and aren't willing to keep throwing money at it, like you are for models and paint and whatever, but feel like a tournament isn't, fairly priced when they're just breaking even most of the time. They usually are doing it as a labor of love. I feel like this kind of segues into this next comment, which is what makes for a good tournament. And I know, Nick, you have a very kind of experienced opinion on this. Like, I feel like you've always said that the tournaments, this isn't just because Tom's here, this is true, that the tournaments that Tom runs are like professional and nice, and that's one of your favorite type of events of all the places we've been, including going to LVO. I think you probably feel that way. Do you want to speak more to like what you feel like makes for a good tournament and what you're looking for as a participant and not as someone running it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm always been a little bit persnickety with all aspects of life. So for me, what I appreciate in these tournaments is showmanship. That's my big thing. I really like the effort. I like like I said, I like the show. When I walk in, I want to feel where the money went. So, you pay, X amount of money to go to a GT, and then, you want to feel like it was worth what you paid for, like you're getting everything you expected out of it. Like if I pay 100 euros to go in, I want to see where this 100 euros went, and it's all of that. It's like taking care of your people and making sure that they're having a good time. Like it's also a service that you're providing. So taking pride in what you do and putting that extra effort into it, like when it comes to venues, like securing options for like food and like all these sorts of things, location. For me, it's a huge factor in like what makes for an enjoyable tournament when I show up. I mean, I'll play in like a closet, I don't care, but that's not going to rank my favorite tournament. And so when I'm really judging those out of like, did I have a good time? One of the biggest factors is not really the games for me; it's the whole overall experience. And big part of the experience is everything I listed, like the venue and the people that you're with. So I'm prissy bitch that way.
No. And to pile on to that a little bit, for me too, it's so important that the atmosphere amongst the players and the community that's created there is one that makes you want to come back. So Tom, there was one time, I think the Dutch Masters last year, where it was one of the first tournament reviews we had done. We didn't cover that event, but Nick and I were talking about an event we did in Belgium, and you had asked me if I was disappointed with how things had gone at the Masters last year. And the experience, the problem that I had and was referencing, I didn't reference it by name, but you picked up on it nonetheless, was more that I, at least the people that I came across in my games, not every player, but the overall general vibe was one of competitive to the point of not having a good time. And that's something that as a TO you probably can't control for all that much. And you were checking in largely also to see what could be improved for the next one. I'm happy to report that the last two big tournaments we've done with the Alliance Open, the teams tournament that we did back in September, I believe, and then this recent one was totally different. And some of that could be due to as small of a thing as the fact that we had windows for those two, which I think does make you kind of like get through that long day a little bit easier. But I think ultimately it also has to do with not only my mindset going into it, but that of the general group at large. Do you have any thoughts about like what might have changed from point A to point B? Was it just that I had bad luck with my matchups? What do you think it's more that the community has to foster a kind of positive, like what's that shirt that was going around recently? I'd rather go make 5 friends than go 5-0.
I bought it.
Yeah.
yeah. 5 new friends, not 5-0.
Exactly. Do you have anything to add to that? What's that, Nick?
I said that's quitter talk.
Oh.
You know whose quote that is? The winner of LVO.
Yeah, but you have to say that if you win the tournament.
I think he said it before the tournament, but
no. See, he knew he was going to win. It was rigged. That's the whole thing.
Yeah. So, did you finish your question, Ryan? Or
yeah, it was kind of just a general nudging in whatever direction you want to take it.
Yeah. So. I have to be a little bit careful with what I say here, but I think last year, I agree, the vibe was different. We had more Worlds players last year. And for example, here in the Dutch community, the Dutch team hadn't been chosen yet. So the 8 players that were going to Worlds weren't 100% settled yet. So I think that also added a little bit of maybe pressure to some of the people playing there. And I think it could have also been a little bit partly a bad luck because a lot of the people that were there last year were also there this year. So I think it's a combination of those 3 things. And I also feel because it was our first Masters and it was, I think, one of the first premium events of that level. Like we really said, look, guys, we really want to do this right. That maybe people came with the idea of like, okay, this is the first Masters, I want to perform here, and then I think throughout the year we got a lot of new players in, and we got a lot more attention also internationally, like the Alliance Open events, but also the players from here. So I think that the vibe just kind of switched throughout last year as well, also after Worlds. So yeah, I agree with you that the vibe was different at AOTC, for example, than at last year's Masters. And I think it was a combination of the World's team's situation, the players that were present, but also I think maybe it was one of the first big events after COVID,
right? As
well. So that probably could have also maybe played a part. People were maybe, I don't know, perhaps not anxious, but yeah, I'm not sure. But I do understand what you mean because I felt a different vibe this time as well.
Yeah,
Were we still wearing masks back then for that Masters?
Yes. No. That was the first. We had to, but like 3 weeks before that event, they said that you only have to wear the masks if you were like in a public space. But so we let people decide for themselves. But I even had to warn not to French kiss each other. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I do remember that, and it was very hard for me to resist.
Yes,
so.
I understand. Sorry for bringing it up.
Yeah, it's still a hole in my heart.
Maybe that's the thing with Ryan that Ryan's talking about, right? No more French kissing. This time you could.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That'll be great. It's my ambitions for the next one.
Nice. So that's, I feel like we've kind of hit on the last 3 points here, not only what makes for a good tournament, but also lessons learned over the years and the goals for the Dutch Masters. So maybe on that last point, Tom, was there anything in particular about this last tournament, the one that we're talking about for the rest of this video, was there anything in particular that you had goal-wise set out to do? Do you feel like you achieved those goals? What do you want to do moving forward? That kind of line of thinking.
Yeah. So to go back a little bit on the remark you just gave about what makes a good tournament, I think if there are people listening that want to run tournaments, I would also advise always to go for quality over quantity. So I've seen events in the UK or whatever where a venue was so packed, tables were placed lengthwise, people it was so crammed, and also the UK players, the French players, everyone who's joining our events the past 1.5 years, they all say that we have a lot of space around the tables. The food is good, and I think that's what makes a great event as well. Like you could run like a great tournament and have like 80 people, but if they were all crammed in a room, the experience will not be that great. So if you're starting out, make sure you try to go for the quality, because people will they won't remember the 5 extra euros they paid 6 months later, but they will remember if they had a shitty time. So
right.
So having said that, your question, what was it again?
So what your targets?
Oh, my goals.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sorry. So my goal for this year was, well, obviously we are preparing for Worlds, so I wanted to see how the terrain maps worked, because they were the same terrain maps we are going to use at Worlds, that we used at the event. I wanted to try the point system, because it's also the same as for Worlds, the 20-0 system, and so it was kind of testing some things for me. But in the end, my goal was actually, we didn't have a specific goal. I just wanted to do better than last year, to be honest. And I think we got it. Also with the new room that the venue built, like the Van der Valk Hotel. Mm-hmm. That new room, like it's so good.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and that's kind of what I meant about also having windows. I feel like that really does change the vibe. It makes it a little, even if it's rainy outside, like we had for the teams tournament back in 2021. It still at least makes you feel like you're alive and not like doing something in your mom's basement. So that's a good vibe too. But in general, like I've had a really good time in that hotel. And I'm looking forward to. I don't know if we're gonna keep doing stuff there. Oh yeah. No, yeah. This time I didn't even stay in the hotel. This time but it's so close and so easily accessible from the airport that it's just it's still a nice experience. All right, so let's move on to the tournament itself. So one of the other TOs, Jeffrey, he had sent out this infographic that you see on the right here, and we'll get to that in just a second. It is worth pointing out that was the Army representation before the tournament. Tom, I'm pretty sure 2 people dropped out at some point. We got down to 52 players. But so, and maybe the Army balance there is a little off, but this is what we had before, and it was a better graphic than what I would have made quickly here. The player base, as we've already referenced, is largely competitive. It's kind of a training ground for Worlds, and it's regionally international. Obviously, in the United States, that idea doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But here in Europe, of course, you can travel only a few hours and still be international. So, Tom, do you have a sense for what countries were represented by the people that were playing in this tournament?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So Belgium and France, UK. I think that for this Masters was pretty local, so to speak. I think those were the only, like, apart from, for example, you guys, but you live here in the Netherlands, so I won't count you.
You got to count it.
No.
To get that credit.
Well, in that case, we have intercontinental players, and
that's right.
Yeah. But so I think UK, France, Belgium, and yeah.
Did we have any Danish players this time? I know we did last year.
No, not this time. Last year, we at the teams event we did, and at the Masters last year we did. The thing is, like, I spoke to the teams, and actually the French, the Danish, they all wanted to come. But for example, in 2 weeks there's a German team event, and there's also another team event in the UK coming up. And Worlds, obviously, like you said earlier in this podcast, is a little tad more expensive than last year. So some of them had to make a choice, and they opted to go for the team events as a team, which makes sense.
Yeah. We'll all be, speaking of the Osnabrück tournament, all 3 of us will be there. You guys are playing on a team together. Yes. And I'm, once again, just as I am with Serbia this year for Worlds, I will be mercenarying for a German team that needed an extra player. And then you guys, so why don't we talk about that real quick while we're on the topic? So Nick, you're as we've referenced on the channel already, you're on the Dutch Worlds team. Tom, obviously you're running the event, so you aren't on a team. But at this tournament, you and our buddy Kai are going to be filling in for a couple players that couldn't make it to the Osnabrück tournament, which is kind of a literal training ground for Worlds, in the sense that it's 8-man teams. 8-person teams. What kind of thoughts do you guys have about this? Nick, this is your first time going to Osnabrück. Is it also yours, Tom?
I think so, yeah. Not Germany, obviously, but I think specifically Osnabrück. I think that this is my first time, yes.
Yeah, and what are you guys expecting from this? Nick, this will be your first time doing it'll be technically, I don't even know, Tom, have you ever done an 8-man tournament before? I've done 4-man tournaments, but never.
Like, competed in myself?
Yeah.
No, I've actually if you think about it, the only team events in the Netherlands are the ones I host, so I've never played in one before.
All right, cool. So this will be your first time doing that. Nick, your first time doing 8. And actually, yep. Nick, is this your first time doing even a full 4? No, you did one in Luxembourg that we didn't end up covering, right?
And one day in
I did Luxembourg one day, and then that was I did my one day here as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and this will be, let's see, I think it's my, oh boy, is it my 4th? It might be my 4th, but definitely my first 8-man team. So, Tom, going back to this point about this tournament being a training ground for Worlds, as we're about to get to, this was the first tournament we had in the Netherlands that was with the current season of the GHB. As such, do you feel like it was able to truly be a training ground, or is it more of a almost pre-training ground in the sense that everyone was still getting their feet with the different battle tomes that were going on? For example, Gits and Beasts were allowed. We didn't have any Beast players, I don't think, but we had a number of Gits players. They were allowed even though we didn't even have access to physical copies of the books, or many people didn't, because there was a logistics issue with shipping. So how do you feel that this sat on a spectrum of being prep for Worlds and in some more kind of upcoming big deal tournaments, or was this more of kind of getting your feet wet here and just trying it out? Where do you think it sits on that spectrum?
I think more the second. I do think that I spoke to a couple of the Dutch Worlds team players, and they did get a lot of valuable info on their list because they had already been playtesting. Obviously, because the GHB had been leaked for a while. Some of the people that are going to Worlds had already been practicing a certain list.
Yeah.
So I think for them it was valuable. I think for example, if you were showing up with Gits, it was probably okay, what's the tome? Okay, I got the tome. Okay, let's throw a list together and just go for it. Same for some of the other people. We had a lot of people actually playing their first AO or even their first GT at Masters as well. I think 7 or 8 people were the first AO event, and 5 of those or 4 were their first GT. So that was great. I think we've made a big growth in the past 2 years anyway. But so I think on the competitive skill, especially compared to last year, or maybe even compared to AOTC, I think the vibe was a lot less competitive. A lot of people were testing stuff out. But I do think that a lot of people already obviously had some GHB games in because it leaked so early.
Yeah, and that's a topic maybe for another day, but it's worth kind of mentioning that. I'm literally reading a bootleg version of the of the KO book right now, today. And it's kind of weird that so many things have been leaked recently in a way that you almost feel like you're kind of in rules limbo, like what happened to Slaves to Darkness, with the rules not being tournament legal until the red bordered book came out. Mm-hmm. Do we feel like this helps the tournament scene or makes it more confusing? At the Bloodstorm event that you played OBR at, Tom, you remember that people were throwing their GHBs in the trash. It almost felt like people were kind of caught in this weird limbo where they wanted to get out of the old rules but couldn't, because they knew what the new ones were. Do you have any thoughts about this? And Nick, feel free to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to go into detail, but I already have the curse of knowledge a little bit because I get some stuff sooner than other people do. But so I'm always in that limbo. That's kind of my problem. So I can understand that people would, already have the GHB for, let's say, 3 weeks, and then they suddenly, for Nick, for example, he probably had the new GHB in his head already a little bit, and then he had to go to LVO. Or did you make like the conscious choice of like not trying to like read or play the new GHB because you had to go to LVO? Or
no. We had that whole like World's Team tournament,
right,
internal tournament. Yeah, exactly. So it was like, it was very rusty when I went back to the LV. I was like, what are these battle tanks? Oh, I can still do barge. That's exciting. Like those ones, it was wild. I don't mind the rules leak as much, as long as they don't do that with it, like where they do a half and half, because we had at LVO the points changed, but not the GHB, and so it was just like, all right, well, you got to pick one, and so that was a challenge. Luckily with Fect, like it didn't matter; they just like balanced themselves out. But I don't mind all that stuff as long as it's like easily separated. It's either all in or none of it's in, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So about that weird limbo, yes, I think there are some situations, for example, the Slaves book, like for Bloodstorm, that's a great example. Like I've been playing Slaves for the past 20 months, like non-stop. I've made some, like on TDS or whatever, played some other armies, Vec, for example, or some other stuff. Yeah, sorry. And but like Slaves has been my main army, is certainly my tournament army for a long time now. But the new book came out. I was a little bit disappointed by it actually, but I started playing it, and then Bloodstorm came up. He decided to not allow the new Slaves book, which is a perfectly fine decision. Like I think either way had some arguments going for it, and then I also, because of my position, also already had the GHB for a while. So I'd been playing a new book in the new GHB for, let's say, 4 weeks. And then I had to go to a GT with the old GHB that didn't allow the new book. So I thought, you know what, let's make it even easier. I'll just pick OBR, which does none of these core rule stuff. And I'll just take that.
Right.
So, but yeah, it can be annoying, especially if you're a frequent tournament player, which I am not, because I'm actually hosting most of them myself.
Yeah. So I know that you're not the person who set the precedent for this, but when we're talking about Worlds has a very stringent cutoff point for when the new rules apply, largely because you guys have to check lists for 100 plus people, and you have to make sure nothing's crossing over, everything's fair, because it's hyper competitive. But Worlds has about a 2-month buffer between rules that come out and the tournament itself. This obviously inherently, though it's a good thing to protect the tournament itself from being unfair or unbalanced, is in and of itself a bit limbo creating its, as it were. What do you think? Do you feel like 2 months is the right amount of time for this? I mean, let's put logistics aside. What would be if it was possible for you guys to analyze all the armies in a shorter time frame? What do you think the right amount of time is to give between a tournament and rules so that people don't get frozen? Like, I can imagine that we would all agree 6 months is way too far in the past, and then by that time everyone's playing armies at a level that's totally changed. The meta might have totally shifted at that point. What do you feel like is the optimal here for a tournament in general? It doesn't have to be for Worlds.
Right. So what I like to do, what we previously did, was everything was 2 weeks in advance. So the list deadline and the rules cut off. We had a couple, I think, personally, I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like releases are following up each other more often now. And also within the battle scrolls coming out constantly, there's a lot of risk for having like a period between your list deadline and the event where some update happens or a new book drops or whatever. So for Masters, I think we decided to have the rules cut off 2 weeks before the event and the list cut off 1 week before. This was also because we decided not to do the pairings a week in advance anymore. But then it ended up that the rules cut off for GITS and BCP was exactly on the day that the rules cut off was anyway. So we ended up in the same situation. And then I said, yeah, but then we have to honor it. Like, we already shifted the rules cut off a week earlier, and then, if something comes out on that date, I'll just house FAQ it. I know for a lot of factions already a little bit what direction it might go, so I can make pretty reliable calls. So I decided to do it. But for Worlds, actually, wasn't even the logistics per se, because honestly, I can. If I grab my ref team together, I think we can do it. Like, we can get all the lists 2 weeks in advance, and we can get it. I'm pretty sure we could. But we've also have the commercial aspect as well, and the fact that the teams have been practicing some lists or some armies for weeks now, and with a list deadline 2 weeks before such a major event, it could happen that 2 new books drop, and then you're screwed, because 2 players in your list or in your team might have a book list that's not working anymore, or maybe the new books are such a big counter against the team setup you chose, etc., etc. So the teams all go in like this little bubble starting in February. Most of the teams, January, February, where they only talk about these lists and this GHB, and then what comes out after, I don't even think they look at it. Like the teams that really want to perform.
Yeah.
And so I think the 6 weeks also protect the teams from getting into trouble, having to find new armies, new lists, all at last minute. And obviously we do like the show with Rob, the Honest Wargamer. So he needs some time to prep statistics, stuff like that. And we want to do a pairing a couple weeks in advance. I think it's 2 or 3 weeks in advance. So we chose to do the rules cutoff 6 weeks before the event. And the list deadline is, I think, 4 weeks before the event. Something like that. So that's all the reasons really, like thrown together. Sorry, I'm ranting a little bit, but
no. I mean that's why you're on here, is we want to hear your perspective. It's something we're not going to come up with on the channel on our own. And a thought that comes to mind for me is this rules team that you've got. How big is it at, say, a normal 1-day event for you guys? How many people do you have for, say, a 2-day, but the GT that we just did? And how many do you have for Worlds? What's the scaling looking like here?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think you need 1 referee for every 24 people. You could stretch it to 30 if it's only 30 people. I think you could do it with 1 ref, especially if it's like, for example, the venue we have in Utrecht. It's pretty, how can I say this? Like in Van der Valk, it's a massive venue. The space between the tables are pretty big, so you have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah. And
in the other venue, it's a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
So, but I like one ref for every 24 people. I think is ideal. So you can scale that way. Worlds, we have a ref team of 5.
Okay.
Two people from the US, 1 Italian, me, and a Belgian. Michael, you know him.
Yeah.
And then we also have 2 TOs walking around, which are Martijn and Danny most of the week, which will run the shop and do all the facilitating and logistic stuff for teams. Like if they have a question about the event or the venue or the lunch, they can go to them, and the 5 of us can just focus really on being on the floor, being visible, and making rulings.
Right. So, I mean, I don't want to belabor this too long, but I really am finding this super interesting stuff. So, honestly, I would rather cut my part of the list discussion shorter if it means we get to talk to you longer. But it would be good for us to do a follow-up video, Tom, sometime in prep for Worlds, if you're down for it.
Sure.
Where we talk more about this at length. While we go on about the armies here, as you can see, I've just summarized the big bullet points from the chart on the right here. We had mostly slaves armies of the, if there was an army that had a lot. Then we had 5 stormcasts, 4 of each of the ones we listed here, and then none of the armies at the bottom. Tom, are you surprised by any of these results?
Not really. When we allowed the Beast book, I thought someone would bring it, but when I was really reading through the book, I think it's a book with a pretty high skill level.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason why. I'm pretty sure some guys grabbed the book and read through it and then decided, okay, this is not something I can decide in 2 days and then play a GT with. So, but to be honest, for example, Suns has been pretty popular here. So I was surprised not to see them at all. But the new GHB kind of tries to push people away from Suns, even though they are performing pretty well in the statistics. But it's not like the first army you think of when you read this GHB.
Yeah.
And then Bone Splitters, Crew Boys, and OBR are pretty niche anyway. I think you hardly see OBR. I played them last event just because I think like aesthetically they're like a really cool army, but you know they don't really play AOS 3.0 at all. So it might not be very tempting to play in.
Until that new book hopefully comes out real soon. So
yeah, sure.
All right, let's move on to the experience. So as I said before, this was the first Netherlands tournament that was in the new season, as in season 2 of GHB, whatever. I'm getting tired of the naming convention because it doesn't even line up with a whole year. But our missions here were 2 from the old book, Presence of Idols and Nidus Paths, and then 3 from the new ones. Nick, do you want to talk about these for a minute? Is there anything that you feel about these missions in particular? Did you feel like it was a good mix of the old and the new? Any thoughts?
Oh yes, I was very pleased that I was leaning more on the new ones. I'm okay with that. And then also when we picked the older ones, at least for my army, these ones were a little bit in my favor. I didn't mind having the Presence of Idols because that one really sets me up to do what I'm going to do anyways, which is great. And then when we get to my list, you'll see why it works out perfectly because I'm a triple threat and you pick 3 idols. So whoop-de-doo. Nidus Path is also a good one for me. It really helps with teleporting. And again, when we see my list, they'll be a little bit changed. So it was a good one to have. And also it gave me a little bit of corner whoring a little bit. I like with the Nidus Path, I can kind of bottleneck where I need to because I'm pretty fast with Feck. And then the other ones, yeah, they were pretty straightforward. I liked them a lot. Yeah, I had a good time with these. There were no bummers. There was none of them where I was like, I just got to get through them. What is I forget the one where it's right in the middle of the 3 that you can't score the middle one before you have your own and so on and so forth. Yeah, and I was like, why did you keep that one? So I was happy to not see those ones. Yeah.
Tom, maybe walk us through a little bit how a TO team or yourself ends up picking these guys. Like, what's the thought process here?
Yeah, so we just roll a die. No. No. That would be cool, though. I know Rob, the only board game, had an event, I think last week, where he did the final GT, where the final game was Twist and Turns. He was like, yeah, no one's going to know who's going to win this. But the selection process is we try to find the most diverse way of deployment and amount of objectives. So we try to do a 3, 4, 5, at least, and then like in this GHB, the max is 5. But if you look at the battle plans with 5, you never have 5 because Twist and Turns, which you should never pick on a competitive event, never has 5 active. Savage Gate, Jaws of Galet, and the other one, Prize of Galet. They both burn or activate objectives, so you also never have 5. So it's actually a game with only a couple objectives. So we try to make sure that you have a lot of variety in deployment and the amount of objectives available. And we also try to, because we knew a lot of the guys were playing their first AO event or even competitive GT, we tried to do the old missions on the first 2 rounds so people could get a little bit the hang of it before they had to start with the new GHB, so to speak. So I think that kind of helped people get in the mood with making sure they play a battle plan they know. So we try to limit the factors that and decision making, let's say.
Yeah. Jonas was talking about in a video we did recently about terrain being set up more or less symmetrically or fairly, especially with regards to something like Desecrate Their Lands. How important is that to you guys when doing the terrain maps, and/or how picky are you guys with whether players end up following the mysterious terrain rules and/or move the pieces around in general? Like, I find that in my games, typically you have to put the objective markers down, which means you have to move all the terrain off anyway, and then you end up trying to put it back in a fair enough way. At least I do. And then my big thing is always saying, hey, let's just make sure we have the same number of terrain pieces partially in our territory so that works out, not counting faction terrain, which is obviously a tax that you're paying for that. Do you have any thoughts kind of on that process? How important is it in a tournament like this? Does it get more important by a tournament in like, for example, with Worlds? And then I know for a fact, or at least my experience last year in Osnabrück was that they had pretty much the same terrain map for every table of every group of 4 tables for every matchup. That was like there'd be one table that had one layout, and then all 4 tables across each iteration would have the same layout.
It's the same this year.
Yeah.
But then for 8.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this? There's obviously a spectrum that GW does not give any advice on when creating the game. It's up to the TOs.
No, exactly. So my personal opinion actually is I don't mind asymmetrical terrain, like personally as a TO, because I think it adds a little bit of a skill to the attacker defender and to the game itself. But for Worlds, if people don't know, some of the aspects in Worlds I try to, or we try as a council, not to decide on our own. So we have the captain's vote on stuff. For example, how many battle plans and what battle plans do you want to play, etc., etc. And the terrain is one of those things, and they all voted for having symmetrical terrain layout. So that's why I created the symmetrical terrain maps, and also applied these at the Masters, just so people could get the hang of it. And I think it adds maybe a little bit of a fair part to the maps, because what happens is, if people don't know, after round 1, people put down their armies for best painted. So what's going to happen is people play their first game, the terrain is all set up perfectly, like we set up before the event, if you don't have a terrain map. And then people are going to put down their armies, so they slide away all the terrain on the table, put down their armies, and then they go to lunch. And then when they come back, they pack in their army, and they just go to the next table, and all the terrain is effed up. So either you go walk around as a TO and then put all the terrain back, or you let players figure that out for themselves. But I've literally seen situations where they were playing a game and they just thought that this was probably the way this terrain was supposed to be set, and you'd have like 2 terrain pieces like literally against each other on like in one guy's deployment zone. And yeah, so I think the terrain maps made my life as a TO easier. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, and if you actually followed then the entire GT, just so I have a little bit of perspective from player standpoint. So that would be nice to hear. But it makes my life easier. I don't think, like as a playing experience, they have to be symmetrical. But yeah, I think it does add a little bit of nuance for the players also to they decide where the terrain goes together. They can just follow the map, and that's it.
Yeah, Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said, Tom. I like the idea of I like attacker defender, especially when it has more weight to it. Even so much so as they actually set up the board entirely. We had some of that in LVO, like a little bit, and so. I really enjoy that aspect just because I usually never get to go first, so I get to just decide what's going to be the best way for me to stay alive, and I think that also can be punishing for someone that kind of forgets that I get to pick the side after that as well. Like they set up and they put like 40 arcanes in their area, and it's like, okay, well I'm going to take that side then. But it's fun. I think. As far as terrain maps go, I follow them religiously. That's like the first thing I do is just whip that piece of paper out and then like, okay, where does this go? So I set it up as best I can every single time, and then I even go as far as like, no, this is the medium one. This clearly goes here. So because I've mentioned it previously in other videos. It's like I'm a big sucker for terrain. It's probably my favorite part of the game. Like I like a really cool setup board. So I try to make it as it was intended as much as possible. So for me, it's a must-have. I also like the idea of terrain maps. I think it makes, especially like in tournaments, it makes it set up a lot quicker, that we're not discussing. I'm not sitting here watching this guy like strategize how he wants to lay down this piece of defensive. I'm like, come on, man, just put it down. So it's really quick, and then I don't also need to wait for my opponent to set up the table. So like how Tom was saying, you kind of fuck off to lunch, and maybe they're having a good time, and I come back and I'm ready to get going. So I can already lay down the objective markers, put the terrain in place, and just really get there. and just get ready for the game. So I appreciate them a lot. I'm a big fan, and I stick to them.
Good.
Yeah, I like that there was medium size. Like, I think most of my games, people were focused on making sure the two big ones were in the right place,
Yeah.
and that the forests were in the right place. I literally didn't play a single game where we used mysterious terrain rules because I don't even do it at home. I don't do it at home. Everyone agrees that Arcane is pretty much the only one that ever really comes into play, and
Ooh, Damned is my baby.
Damned, yeah.
Damned is my baby. Love it.
I'm just not a big fan of those extra rules. I'm kind of waiting for 4th edition to come out with better terrain rules, and in the meantime, just kind of play the game. I like it to being symmetrical, but mainly because I just don't want to have to change sides of the table. Like, that's my big thing. Granted, I tend to play fast armies, or that have some kind of ability to reach people regardless. So, like, in this tournament, I was playing KO. I didn't give a shit where the terrain was, because I was going to get to you anyway. So, sometimes it locks you out, but, like, there are some armies that are definitely going to get hit harder with than others. And I can definitely say I'm just glad that there wasn't the whole, like, garrison. Like, I don't think we really had a whole lot of garrison stuff going on at this tournament, or if we did, me and my opponents were ignoring it. But I just don't like the current rules with regards to sneakily entering a building and all of a sudden you're in combat. I feel like GW needs to correct for those kind of things, and I'm just glad to see tournaments that aren't too nitpicky about that kind of stuff. So, moving on to the experience, Nick, you played FEC for your last time, I guess, at a tournament, at least for a while, and you did, I think, your highest ratio here, 4-1. I don't know if 7th place, I know for a fact 7th place is not your highest place ever at a tournament, but with 52 people, that's pretty damn good. I know you were pretty happy with your score. Is there anything you want to add just in the overview before we get into the games themselves?
No, it was a great last run with him for a while. I was really happy with it. I had a good time. Tried out a list that probably shouldn't have done as well as it did, so I was surprised and had a good time with it.
Yeah, and I was playing KO for my first time. I'm kind of trying things out in this stage for my Worlds team because I'm a mercenary for both this German teams tournament I'll be doing and also Serbia. So I have a lot of armies, but I don't have a lot of flexibility with my priority of what I want to choose, because I have to give priority to the people who have less armies and that are more, officially on their country's team. So KO was also, once I found out that the new book was going to be coming out shortly, I wanted to rush and get a KO tournament in because I like the old rules, or at least wanted to play with the old rules before they passed away. And 2-3, I have to say, even though 32nd place is not my highest placing at all, 2-3 is actually, and with my conversion score from the points differential system, this is actually one of the better tournaments I've had for a 2-day tournament. So in the short here, I actually was pretty happy with it, all things considered. Though KO is very matchup dependent, I think. But Tom, I've got you listed here as we had Nick with FEC, me with KO, and you with TO. What would you give it on a 5-point scale there? Did you go 5-0 with this tournament? Do you feel like this tournament was knocking it out of the park?
Well, I think I went in a 3-2. I did like a great first day.
Yes.
And then went 0-2 on the Sunday. I had a pretty big hangover on Sunday. I don't think the players saw, but I don't think it impacted the quality of the event at all, to be honest. But actually,
better for me.
Yeah, and I got some great Hank, one of the local guys here, got me some medicine. Could be drugs, I don't know, but it helped. So I felt a lot better after the first round after lunch. And so maybe we can stretch to a 4-1. Yeah, I hope I can peak at Worlds and get the 6-0 in that case. Can just get the 6-0 there.
Yeah.
So yeah. By the way, Nick, did you know that I think apart from one player, you had actually the highest strength of schedule in the top 8.
I believe so. Yeah.
So you had to fight hard for that 7th place.
I really did. It was not an easy spot. No. Especially with what I was running.
Exactly, yeah, because 2 of your opponents, 3 maybe? No, two of your opponents were in the top 8 as well. So
yeah.
Speaking of strength of schedule, Tom, we had discussed at one point an idea I had for trying to ELO things. Did you happen to? I can talk about it some other time, but did you happen to run the numbers as under my idea, or is that something that's
no,
not
not yet. No, not yet.
Okay.
No,
Yeah, let me know if that changes. I'll explain it in another video in the future, but I do think there might be some legs to that. But okay, let's move on. So. Nick, here's your feeding time 69, as I have named it. I didn't want you to name it, because everyone, even Jonas, last time we covered this with the LVO, he's like, I'm sick of this list. I'm tired of reading it. I would admit this one's probably the most different of all the lists you've done on this. So walk some people through what you did differently here.
Fam. Changed it up a bit. We are not feeding frenzied anymore. Our skin is all blistery. We are the blister skin, and what that does differently for the main part is lets me teleport with my fly stuff, and also potentially gives me an extra CP if I decide that I want to roll something other than a 1 for once in my life. And then also -1 to hit with one of my artifacts that you have to take with this. So it's still in the 2.0 version with you taking sub-factions. You have to take these certain artifacts and command traits. So that was... yeah, it's not fun, so that's why I keep it like with this, what I was running, because these are not the things that I would like to take. But anyways, I got my standard Ghoul King on Zombie Dragon, one on a Terrorgeist, the usual suspects there, but this time the Terrorgeist got the -1 to hit from shooting, from enemy shooting, so that's one of the Blister Skin artifacts. Then I've got my General, who is the Crypt Infernal Courtier.
Oh, that was your General. Really?
Yeah.
I guess I inputted it wrong here. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no. So he was my general, so he was getting the extra CP rolling, and then, swapped the spells around, but they were all pretty much the same, and then got the extra artifact from my archers for +1 to cast. Infernal Courtier, I gave him the Stubborn as the Rhinox in this because of the teleporting. I just pop him on an objective and potentially steal that away from someone. And then the other big goodie here is the 9 block of Flayers. That was pretty fun. And then running the Chalice for bringing some models back to life or just healing off those pesky wounds that are hanging onto my characters.
Nice. Nick, I'm looking at Pun Pun right now. It says the Ghoul King on Royal Zombie Dragon is your general. So
that's true. I made a mistake. It is that, because now I'm seeing the command trait as the Hellish Jet. So I'm wrong. It is the Zombie Dragons, my general.
Okay. By the way, Pun Pun, Tom, did you come up with Pun Pun? Where's what's the origin there?
So, I don't know the exact origin actually, because I joined the. I only started TOing 2 years ago, and they already had Pun Pun. So, but like they wanted to have a system, so they asked like a guy they knew if he could like build something, program something for them, and he did. So 2 years ago, I wanted to do like a small local event, so I contacted the AO guys because they rent out the terrain sometimes to other TOs, and I wanted to do the same. And then one of the guys actually just left the team, so they asked me to join him, and I did. So I don't know exactly where it came from. I just it was already there when I joined.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, sorry.
So but I know that Honest Wargamer Rob he likes saying Pun Pun. I've heard him get some joy out of the fact that that's what I think he thinks that that's like a Dutch thing, and I don't know that it is. Like,
no, it's not.
It just sounds like a random sound.
It is.
So Tom, when you're looking through lists, and let's assume that you don't know that this is Nick's list. Like, let's assume you see a list come through. You don't know
if
that
I saw this list, I would know, but go on.
Right. But I guess I'm saying, imagine this is Worlds, and it could be anyone. And you see a list. Now, you know, of course, if you know it's Nick, you know he's been piloting this army for a long time now. He's got gotten good results with it, and knows what he's doing. Do you feel like this kind of list is an auto win at all, or do you feel like this is something that you really have to know how to pilot when you see this from a kind of more neutral TO standpoint?
So I think all the old books, the pre-3.0 books, are actually hard to pilot currently because
when a new 3.0 book comes out, most of them have actually pretty achievable battle tactics. And you can just like mix and match your command traits and artifacts. So I think the older books have some challenges in list building, and they also have not all of them, but some of them are you can see they're a little bit dated. For example, the Flesh Eater Courts, almost the entire book hits on 4s. And when you look at the new books, I think the profiles got a lot better. Like the points got higher. You see less models on the table in the newer books, but the profiles got better as well. So I think this does require the pilot well. It has some movement tricks. You have to time your combat really well. You really have to time when you go into something, because even though everything hits really hard, you have like the heroic action and the Fargulf you summon in to get your players back, but they die pretty quickly as well, because they have like I think a 5-up base, and the dragons have a 4-up base. So if you time your combats or incorrectly, you could lose one or two of your hermits in a turn, and you really have to screen them out well. And so yes, I do think it's hard to pilot. I think like with Khorne, some of the older books, they just play a little bit of a different type of game.
Right. When you're looking through lists at a tournament, do you ever see something that you're just like, I have no idea how this person's going to win, and then they end up proving you wrong, or show like something?
Yes.
Can you give us a good
literally
example?
happened at this one.
That literally happened because we had a guy. I'm not going to mention names or whatever, but we had a guy signed up. I've never heard of him before. And not to sound cocky, but if I haven't heard your name before in the AOS scene, you're probably new, because I know almost everyone by now, by name, or at least I know the names. So there was a new guy who came in, and he submitted a list, and I'm going to like exaggerate a little bit, but it looked like he bought 2 start collecting boxes, threw them together into a list, and then just submitted it. So I spoke to Jeffrey. I sent the list to Jeffrey, and I said, "Hey man, look at this guy's list. Should we like send him a text that like we're excited that you're coming, but just know you're going to the Masters, and you might get your army handed back to you, turn 2 5 times, which can be an unpleasant experience, and we just want you to give you a little bit of a heads up." So, and this guy, he was like, "Yeah, I know, this is what I kind of had painted up, so I'll just bring this, and maybe it's a cool off-meta choice." And, we had a little bit of a laugh about it, like the player and me. And then he went 3-0 day 1.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, what's happening here? And it turned out in the end that he came over from 40k, and he's actually a pretty skilled 40k player, so probably just outplayed some people. I still think his list wasn't perhaps like the most optimal list his army could bring, but he did well. So I couldn't really say anything about it. What happens more is the opposite, that I think, oh, this is a great list, and then it goes 2-3 or 1-4, and you're like, oh, okay,
sure,
I was wrong, or maybe the pilot made some mistakes, but
yeah,
like generally. Right now with the internet, Discord, Twitter, whatever, most of like the wonky combos or the great lists you have seen here or there. And I think with our community being this young, I think we have a lot of people taking inspiration from the UK events, the American events, when constructing their list or the core of their list. They take proven combos and then they build around it to like flavor it up, or just straight up copy it anyway. So I think because of the position I'm in, also with the world's list coming in every year, I see a lot of lists, so I probably have seen a lot of stuff already, but this guy I just mentioned, he surprised me.
Sure. Yeah, the people listening to the channel will know this about me in general, that I hate listening to battle reports and other people's list ideas, because I'm as we name it, a Johnny player. And I don't like doing a list that someone else came up with. I'm okay with something having good combos. But I remember, for example, I don't play Ogres, but I own all the Battle Tomes. And when I got the new Ogres book and saw all the Iron Blaster stuff, I wasn't listening to anyone else's advice. I was super excited about it, and even briefly thought about doing ogres. And then as soon as I found out everyone else was on that train, I was like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And I feel like that's, for me, part of the reward is if, and it still hasn't quite happened yet. Sometimes it does in my individual games, but at a tournament it hasn't quite happened yet. But if I can manage to find a list that someone isn't playing, and then end up doing really well with it, that just once in a blue moon, that would be more rewarding for me than playing something that I had no creative input in, and then ended up doing really well because it's supposed to do well. And one of the things I like about Nick's list here, or just Nick's armies in general, is that everyone says that this army is supposed to be bad right now. Like, everything I hear on the internet is that Feck is not sitting in a good place. Yet Nick proves them wrong constantly. Or, in a similar way, Mitchell de Boer, who won this event and Bloodstorm, has been winning with trees, like tree lords, in a way that people weren't saying positive things about until about a month ago. Right? Like,
yeah, sure.
And that's, to me, that is so rewarding. If I could be in either you, Nick, or Mitchell's shoes right now, getting to be, you guys are both great players, so that goes a long way. But getting to play something that everyone says is gonna suck, and then you end up winning anyway, or doing a really good job with it anyway, that's kind of like the ultimate goal for me. In this coming tournament in Osnabrück, I'm going to be playing literally, with a couple changes because of Worlds restrictions, the Lumineth list that Honest Wargamer Rob did. I had to change a couple things because I couldn't take Spell Portal, for example. I'm not excited about it because it's literally I had no creative input except for choosing a couple spells and swapping out the portal for something else. But maybe it'll be amazing. I don't know. Tom, when you're at these tournaments, do you see this kind of balance between people who are just bringing, like you said, what they have painted, another type of person that's bringing things that you can tell they're really trying to make work, whether it works or not, and then people who are bringing net lists? Would you split that into kind of like 3 different groups, or is it not so black and white as that?
Good question. So I think there's a group of people here in the local community that, mostly use the strong lists, and they don't really enjoy maybe list building that much. We have some players like Dennis Bouwmeester, for example, who always tries to challenge the status quo and always plays something other people are not. I'm a little bit in between. Like, I think I'm probably a Johnny player at heart, but I do want to play like a competitive list. Last year when the Kronspine came out, at first, everyone's like, and I was reading this and I was like, holy, this thing is really good. So I brought it like to the one day that you were also at, Ryan. I think Nick was also there. With the slaves, we're also in a pretty bad position, and I end up winning that tournament just because I brought something that, with the Kronspine, like the week after, like that thing. That weekend is when it exploded, so everyone was taking it, not because of me, but like the timing. I was one of the first in our local scene, and like I got a lot of enjoyment out of that. Just like the Kronspine itself is maybe not like a very great piece to play against. Well, now it is, but it wasn't at the start. And but like having thought of that list myself, and then Jeffrey taking that list to like the German tournament, and then almost winning that event, just losing the finals with like a slight adaptation to that list, that really hyped me up. And I think we have a couple of those players here in the Netherlands as well. I know, Ryan, you never really played the status quo. Like, you'd play maybe a strong sub faction that has been proven, but you'd always like give your own twist to your list. And same with Nick, obviously, playing the effect for a while. So yeah, I think we have a healthy combination. We have some people that always bring their own stuff. We have, I think, some people that bring the meme stuff, and we have some people that will straight up copy a list from an event that is done well. Right. I know, for example, Paul. I think he took the list that Jack Armstrong went 5-0 with the week before, which is fine. Like, Paul goes to a tournament. Paul Prozzi goes to a tournament to do well. He wants to compete. So that's the reason he will take a list that has been proven, and he knows he can pilot.
and some other people that, like I said, Dennis Bouwmeester or Michiel de Boer, for example, they will try to do well with like their own iteration of a faction.
Yep.
And they don't really care if that faction is good at playing, top tables at that moment. They want to enjoy themselves, but they do want to do good. So they will never bring a list that's crap. They do want to, compete and get a good result, but they don't really care if that's with the top faction.
Right. And for the record, I'm not saying I think it's wrong to bring a net list. It's just I have no interest in it. That's just like I would rather go to a tournament and play a Timmy list where I'm only playing War Hydras than the other way around. So
I had that with the OBR list, right? Like I was like, okay, like I'm just gonna bring 8 Morghast and 9 like Stalkers and not play like the Mortex spam, and then I might suck, but at least it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So let me go on to my list real quick so we can see how this is actually some amount of combination of me wanting to do what I want to do, but it really is, if anyone knows the KO book as it was or currently is but is about to change, Bark Zilfin was kind of the only choice you should take. It's just overpowered good compared to the other sub-factions. Now, was my list the optimal? I don't know, but it was closer to doing a net list than I usually do. In my personal games at home, and I try not to play against only casual type, chill games type players, but it was actually performing really well. And then at the tournament, I think it really depends on how everything lines up. But I'll walk you guys through it real quick. I know, Tom and Nick, you know how this works. But for those that don't...
I'm curious to know how your Lord Ordinator did.
The problem... I actually think the Lord Ordinator would do better in the new book than in the old one, because the new book is less teleporty. The old book, you're teleporting the whole time, and he's just not around. For those that don't know, this is an ally from Stormcast that gives a wholly within 9-inch bubble for +1 to hit on all profiles, shooting and melee, for Order war machines in that bubble. And it's not Stormcast war machines, which would only be one model. It would only be the Celestar Ballista, but that this applies mostly to KO. In fact, I think of the Lord Ordinator as a KO model in disguise, because they get the most benefit from him. The problem is, the ships want to move so fast, and he can't teleport. And you might be saying, well, why can't he take, he's a GC, why can't he take the aspect of the champion, Tunnel Master? Well, it's because he's an ally, and allies can't receive enhancements, even the GC ones out of the book. So it couldn't even teleport him once. The only way you can actually teleport the guy is to take a Knight Vexilor and give him the banner that lets a Stormcast unit teleport, and then do it once per game. But that's sinking a lot of points in for something you're probably not going to do. I did think about it.
You could do the spell in a bottle Soul Screen Bridge.
Wow, that seems like, yes, that could be done. So
really leaning into it, huh?
Really leaning into it, yeah. I did take Spell in the Bottle, so why don't we talk about that while I have it. I originally started with, if you don't know, the Aether Chemist can take an artifact that lets him, you have to pay points for it, not anymore, spoiler alert in the new book, but you have to pay points for a Endless Spell, but you were allowed to, at the time, bring any Endless Spell that exists, including the non-generic ones, so those from specific armies. I originally started with a Purple Sun that, if you don't know, in Bark Zilfin, one unit can do a once per game hero phase move. So you would teleport a boat, put it in range where the Aether Chemist can let the spell out of the bottle, and then teleport away if you want in the following movement phase or whatever you want to do. A lot of people take the Purple Sun so you can give some extra rend within 6 inches to all your shooting, which in KO is actually kind of embarrassingly low rend. But what ends up happening is they ruled it that you can't control that Purple Sun that you just put on the table. So every other turn, basically someone else is controlling it, and its usefulness might kind of fall off. So Warp Lightning Vortex has the exact same casting value, which means it has the exact same dispel value of a 9+ that you would need to get rid of it. You plop that Warp Lightning Vortex in the middle of the board. It actually can be sometimes hard to put it in the board right because it has to be outside an inch from all models, and it has to be in a very specific triangle formation. But it's super flexible otherwise with where you can set it up. It does a crazy amount of damage and has lifted a lot of models for me. And is sitting in the middle of the board, which typically you can kind of teleport away from and just let the enemy have to deal with it. It did perform well in general, but you know, you have to kind of... one of the reasons I have a 4-drop list here is because there's no way with the old 2nd edition book forced command traits and artifacts to get around this extra artifact problem. So this is an artifact that's taken on the Ether Chemist. In order to get an extra artifact after the required artifact, you have to take a command entourage, which raises my drops to 4. But the good thing about KO, with all the teleports as it once had, is you could just literally deploy in a corner, as Nick and I call it, corner whoring. And Nick, I have to say, I learned all of my corner whoring tactics from you, so thank you.
What do you call it when you deploy on the edge then?
Oh.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah, wow.
You already know.
Yeah, there we go. But honestly, I've never had an easier time deploying than with KO. It was so easy. Just everything's as compact in the corner as possible, and then you just say it's your turn. But anyway, the artifact that the Injure Master's taking isn't important. The command trait is also not important. The Arcanaut Admiral chose the aspect of leadership of the Alpha so that I could do once per game a 3-time all-out attack, all-out defense, or redeploy, not Unleash Hell, which would have been nice for this army. But basically, you've got all these ships, which is why I called it Shipageddon, that are supposed to be castling up around this Lord Ordinator and getting the +1 to hit. That didn't occur as often as I'd like. The gun haulers had the long-distance gun, the drill cannon, while the rest had the normal, you could choose 2 modes cannons. And then basically, it just is trying to teleport. Everyone's trying to get within 12 inches, which is where most of the really good shots are being had. And then you just blow something to smithereens and teleport away and do it again. It has proven pretty strong, but KO isn't exactly known for high rend or particularly good to hit rolls, to wound rolls. So it can really oscillate between being really good and really kind of underwhelming. And that's kind of my experience. Tom, do you have any comments about a list like this, whether it's this exact list or not?
Well, when you submitted it, I obviously saw the Lord Ordinator, so I was curious to see how that will do. I played KO when the book came out. Then this book came out, I played it for 8 months. I didn't really play events back then, and to be honest, like the local guys I played against at one point asked me to not play the army anymore because they didn't really enjoy playing against it. So I sold it actually because I didn't want to shelve it. But I always was always toying with the idea of playing the Lord Ordinator. So I was very curious to see how that would do. So curious to hear that. You know, I think he could be a good addition in the new book. I think in the old book he wasn't bad, but it'd probably just be for like turn 1, maybe turn 2, and then he'd be on his own, like probably like holding an objective somewhere, maybe getting you a battle tactic or something like that, which is fine. And like generally, I like having a lot of boats. Like it looks great on the table. So I think it's nice. I think the only thing is that, for example, the Navigator is something I really in the old book then, because there's a new book coming, but the Navigator I valued very, very highly. So I was curious to hear your thoughts if you might have missed him, or maybe you never play him anyway.
Do you mean just for the ability to turn off what's it called, movement for an enemy unit? Okay.
It's so good, like against like an Archeon or like the dragons from Nick. It's if he gets like half move.
Yeah,
he's going to have to rely on the run and charge spell. So,
well, check this out. In my 5 games at your tournament, and you know this, Barak Zilfin has reroll 1s for all sky vessels, which I have 5 of here, against flying units. I didn't play a single flying unit until my last game, and it was a Chaos Sorcerer Lord on Manticore, which isn't exactly the main thing you're trying to shoot anyway. So. So to answer that, doesn't that ability from the Navigator have to target flying units?
Yes, I believe so.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess in my experience, it hasn't added up much. But
No,
yeah,
no,
maybe in
no.
other games. Depends on who your meta is, I guess.
For sure, for sure.
Nick, you got to play one quick game with this list. Well, not this list. I played a variant of it with the incarnate that you let me borrow recently when you were trying out the Gits. What do you think of KO in general? Do you have much experience against them?
No, I don't have a whole lot of experience playing against them. I always seem to dodge them in the tournament scene, but I was supremely underwhelmed by your shooting phase. Like I remember going, "Wait, that's it?
Yeah,
that's all you got?" And then
without the sun, it's hard to get like a lot of damage through.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did plenty of damage, but I just expected it to be more. Like he almost deleted a block of hoppers, I think it was, or was it my squig herd? I don't remember. But yeah, it was. Oh yeah, it was a squig herd. So you got through probably 60 wounds worth, but that was with everything in there, and I think it was even a double turn.
No, I didn't get a double turn. You definitely got the charge off on me, and we called it immediately after. But the trick was at least I had to be outside of 9 of your squig herds, so you couldn't do those mortal wounds, which was fortunate.
Yeah, that was cheeky. I liked it, but yeah, it was a quick one.
Yeah, we just.
Yeah, Brian, didn't you against a game against Daily? Maybe you had to like kill 3 Guard and like you planned down your entire army and shot at him. You didn't kill one, or maybe you killed one.
It was against Yippe at the first game, and he had them buffed to high hell, and there's nothing I can do in KO against Guard. It's not. Yeah, that was pointless. So.
Yeah, safe stacking would just get you.
Yeah, for sure. So let's move on to the actual matchups. Nick, you're welcome to go through this as quickly or as slowly as you want, but I've tried to summarize what the main highlights of these different lists were. I put a Gits artwork here on the left because we both played against them. That's the only crossover we had. But why don't you go ahead and start us off with the Seraphon and walk us through what that experience was like. I think that was against... Ignaz, right?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, that was quite a game. It was pretty low on body count. Spent most of his points on the Slan and the Kronspine. So, reading the list, I felt pretty confident. I knew what I needed to do was just get the Kronspine out of the way and then get behind the line and just get my dragons in there and then survive the mortal wounds from everything, so just the Commons Call and everything like that. He had some underwhelming casting phases, so wasn't too bad with the Comet. And then in execution, I did exactly what I needed to. So I had to survive a couple rounds of Salamanders because he was summoning them back. But I was getting lucky that he wasn't getting a whole lot of not Primordial, the other one, whatever Seraphons are called. Yeah, whatever they're called. So anyways, he wasn't getting a whole lot of summoning off, which was helpful. And I basically put 2 of my dragons in the far corner, hoping a Kronspine would go, ooh, monsters, I like those. And they did, and then I got away with that, and I was able to fly away, and then basically took his Kronspine out of the game. So by the time that he was able to get back, everything was dead. It wasn't a slam dunk. I think I won that game by maybe 1 point, I think is what it was. So it was hard to chew through all of the Seraphon, and then... what really came down to is being able to score battle tactics was a challenge on some battle rounds. But yeah, it was a really close game. It was really fun. But yeah, I was happy with the performance on that one.
So Tom, I know
it was 1 point. Yeah, I just checked. It was 1 point. I think Nias also told me that he actually mispicked a battle tactic or forgot to score it or something like that early on in the game. He picked a battle tactic and then he gave up halfway on scoring it, and then
yeah, I think it might have been Desecrators. I honestly can't remember. But yeah, that doesn't sound familiar.
So it was close, yeah.
Yeah, it was really close.
So Tom, I actually don't know Inyaz personally. He's at a lot of these events and I just haven't met him yet. But this list, do you have any opinions on this, or do you know any kind of anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, so Inyaz, I play him every other week. here at my place or at his place. Ineos actually, like in 2.0, I think Ineos hasn't had a tournament where he didn't win 4-1 or better. But then he took a little bit of a hiatus from Warhammer, and then he, like last year, he did an RTT, and then this year he wanted to do the Masters again because it was his first like competitive like event again. But like Seraphon isn't really in a great place anymore, so he was like, "What should I play?" And then was banking on either going 4 Sallies and a Kronspine or 8 Sallies. So in the end, he had never played against or with a Kronspine before, so he was like, well, I just want to see what the hype is all about, or was all about, and decided to run it. I think it wasn't the most competitive pick, but I think he knew. And for Ineos, it was just playing a GT with all the friends being there and having a laugh. And I know Ineos only plays Seraphon. He's playing Seraphon for 4 or 5 years. So he's a Seraphon OG.
Yeah.
So yeah, he just went to have fun, and he was excited to play Nick the first round because he knew from like the results from earlier events that and from stories that Nick is considered to be very solid. So he was looking forward to that, and I think Ineos was a little rusty. He admitted it himself as well. But yeah, he can definitely still play, and I think he just needs some reps.
Nice. So my first matchup was against a Slaves army. This was my second time, I believe, with the new Slaves book, and they were playing a Kabbalist. This was Yippe. I believe he. This is one of his first tournaments ever.
Yes.
And he was playing Kabbalist, which, if you don't know, is the magic-heavy version of Slaves, where everyone becomes a wizard, and there's a heroic action they can do that makes them really good at casting. In my totally not good at getting rid of casting army, I just kind of let him do his thing. And he was playing kind of a mixed list of a little bit of everything you expect in Slaves to Darkness right now. It was a close game. With the points differential system, I went 8-12. Which is Tom, is that as close as we had? It was either 10-10, and then the next distinction was 8-12 or 12-8. Is that correct?
You could get an 11-9 with a minor victory if you tie everything, but you win on a battle tactic.
Ah, okay, I didn't realize that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the only one that was printed on the sheet was like an 8-12 for points differences.
Yes, yeah. Points it was 12-8.
Okay, so I got as close to what I thought of as a tie as possible, and this is kind of the story with all of my games except the last one. But yeah, the Slaves is just such a hard army to kind of try to win against with KO as they existed, at least in the old book. So, Tom, do you have any opinions on this game as a Slaves player yourself?
Yes, indeed, Slaves normally has a pretty decent matchup against KO. His list was a little bit of everything, which I think the book actually tries to force you to really double down on stuff. So you see Knight spam, you see Vanguard spam, you see Warrior spam, you see Splinter Fang spam, and this was a little bit of a mix. So I think it might not be the most optimal list, but it's still it's tanky. They can save stack. They have good saves, so I think it's hard for you, especially without the Purple Sun, it's hard for you to chew through. And they have a lot of casting going on, and they're pretty good at getting battle tactics as well. So, and I think a block of 20 warriors for you, I think it's almost impossible to chew through.
Right. Right.
Currently, because they're really tanky.
Right, and one thing that I've been talking about in some of these is this first matchup. Actually, in Jonas's and our review of the new battle plans, I was actually saying that Twists and Turns might be kind of good for balancing out a 5-game tournament if it's the first game, because it takes some of the win more that ends up you're going to see with a 20-0 points differential between a really good player and a new player. It's because of the randomization, it's going to level that out a little bit or make it extremely worse, but it can't get worse than 20-0.
Yes.
And so my idea was, if you're going to include that in a tournament, why not have fun with that one starting out, and it might balance it out a little bit Mario Kart-ish. And to my point, sometimes when you play this first game, which is basically going in ignorant of where people stand skill-wise, it's randomly determined who your opponent is. And from that point on, it gets more and more accurate about where you should be playing. Even though Yippa beat me, he ended up scoring a couple places lower on the chart because that's just how this can work. We ended up getting a very similar thing. Sometimes, Nick, I feel like you get a lot of 20-0s in your first game. I almost never get 20-0s in my first game. Tom, what do you see in kind of like the long run? How important is that first game for establishing how you're actually going to do in the tournament? I mean, we talk about submarining.
So, yeah. So I think you're referring to the scoring system we were using now, because that's such a big influence on. Like, if you go to Bloodstorm, which is one of the local Dutch events, Ryan spoke about it in the past. They do points first, so that means your list has to be focused on getting the 20-0. So in my opinion, it will focus you down on like tabling your opponent, making sure they can't score as many primary points. And then, so you can't really submarine. They want you to bring a hard list, and then you have to try to 20-0 every round, and then you can win the event. For example, I went 2-3 with my OBR, but all my games were 9-11s, I believe, and my wins was 20-0 and 18-2. So in the end, I almost got third place, even though I went 2-3. For our event, I know some of the players try to have like a minimal win first round, like a 13-7, because it's wins first. And then you might face a less, a weaker opponent, so to speak. That's also on a 1-0, but weaker in the second round. And then that way you can still you can maybe submarine your way, so to speak, to a 5-0.
Yeah.
So I think both systems have their flaws, but in the end, as you can see now, the two 5-0s at the same points, and the strength of schedule had to decide the winner. So if one of the two had submarined or had taken a 12-0 in the first round just to be, to avoid the better players, they wouldn't have, they would immediately be ruled out for first place because there was another 5-0.
Right. For those that aren't familiar, submarining is when you do well the first one and then you go lower so that you end up not having to play against people that are as strong. Like if you're banging out 20-0s the whole time, there's a really good chance you're going to end up playing against the hardest people possible. Which, Nick, Tom was just saying you ended up having the second strongest strength of schedule. Do you feel like you are a submarine player, or do you just kind of go in and do it and make it work anyway?
Oh, I just always go for the 20-0 if I can. I don't care. It just worked out this way that I subbed on this one, but it didn't pay off at all. So my submarining by winning by 1 point faced me with another extremely difficult matchup. So yeah, I didn't benefit at all. It was just one right after another of like, oh my god.
Nice.
Yeah, and talking about your twists and turns, you know what the problem with that is? Let's say a guy pays €100 for a ticket to go to an event, and then he's been practicing for weeks, he's got his list down, and then game one he plays twists and turns, completely dominates his opponent, but because touch of fate makes it so that his objectives never become active or hardly become active, he loses the game, he's going to have a bad weekend.
Yeah.
With something that was out of everyone's control, literally. Well, it wasn't my control because I could have not picked that mission for round one. But I think it's too much potential for a feel bad. I would rather, like we discussed, maybe not use round one in the pairings for round two. Like you play round one, and then actually round two is when the ranking start, so that it picks up the random factor. But I think having a twist and turns round one would be cool for like a Bugman, like for a doubles event. But for like an expensive GT, not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have different opinion about this. I think it's more strategic than a lot of people give it credit for, because you don't have to turn on an objective. We don't roll on every objective just because it exists. We roll on it only if it's controlled. Or inactive, and which means you do have some amount of control over whether it turns on to even be random in the first place. But regardless, the thing that Tom was just referencing of maybe starting counting the tournament results by the second game in a 5-game tournament is kind of similar to what we had talked about, Tom, which is where that you established kind of a record first before the official kind of record keeping of the tournament starts, just to kind of put people in their kind of respective locations in terms of strength of schedule and such. Okay.
I'll make a spreadsheet tomorrow to see if I take out the scores of round 1, what would happen in the ranking.
And yeah, my original suggestion was round 1 and 2, just to take out as much. So it basically becomes a 3-game tournament with 2 games of pre-qualifiers. But anyway, either way, I'm curious to see if it changes anything. So Nick, the Skaven list that you played, from what I could see, the big threats were Thanquol and a couple of Vermin Lords, a Deceiver and a Warbringer. And then it was mostly Clan Rats and then some Night Runners, not the Gutter Runners, which are the stronger ninjas. What were your big threats in this game?
No, you nailed it, though. It was the Vermin Lords and the Thanquol. So he had the lunchbox, as we know it, and so Thanquol came flying into my face, and then shooting him into my flayers was awesome. So 4 dice per model, which was great. He deleted my flayers turn 1, and I think he also took some other stuff out with it. So it was looking pretty grim from round 1. And the hits just kept coming. So it was like not.
I walked past your table and you looked at me like, I'm going to die here.
Yeah, like I just accepted. I was like, well, there's that. And then, not being like all the spells going off, not being able to unbind or really getting my spells off. So it was not going my way. But each round I kept noticing, it was like, I'm keeping up with points, to be honest. And I was just kind of going, and I was like, huh. And then I knew that the hammer was going to drop at some point. I was like, okay, well, then he's going to wipe me, and then the game's over. But he never actually quite got there. And the problem is that in turn 1, with being so aggressive, I had to move away from my throne pretty quickly, which I don't normally do because I want to summon my stuff for free. Wasn't able to this time, but that actually ended up winning me the game because I had a late game summon, and I was like, put that thing right where I needed to. And was able to take some objectives and get all the points that I needed to still maintain. And what actually ended up winning the game, and I think we had mentioned this in one of our previous ones, was time. So my opponent actually ran out of time and was unable to deny me my grand strategy, and that's what ended up winning the game. So time is a resource, people, and you need to manage it well when you're playing this game. So that was a close one. I better believe I was watching that clock like a hawk because I started noticing it was getting down to a couple seconds here. I was like, okay. So he was unable to get out of the hero phase before his time ran out. And so, that was a moment. So it was whatever.
But did he put the clock down or did you?
It was mutual, so we both had the clock, so we were both going to play it. I know this guy is trying to become one of the more competitive players, so he's doing everything by the book, trying to run the clock. The other thing was he was trying to be very thoughtful about his turns, so I think that cost him a lot of time in the end. Whereas, I've been playing this army for a long time, so I know what I'm going to do. It doesn't. If you've played against me, and Tom, I have very fast turns. I'm just kind of I'm done.
The same with slaves. I've played it for so long, I can just if someone would put down a clock, I'd be like, that might be trouble for you, but I'll be fine. No worries.
It wasn't too bad for me there. But yeah, I really didn't get to do a whole lot of things. This was actually a great show for the idea that movement wins you a game. So this one was a lot of just positioning well, staying alive, because I had no models by the end of it, but I was able to keep maneuvering and getting to objectives, and then Blister Skin being helpful at being able to teleport things to get to where I needed to. I think a little bit of some misplays there of moving off of objectives and not remembering that, okay, boop, I can fly back and now this is immediately mine again. If he had left 20 rats on it, I can't take it from him. So there was things like that where I was capitalizing on, and then ultimately, it just resulted in me, I think, only winning by 1 point again or something like that with my grand strategy. So I needed to dive deeper in my submarine.
Yeah, do you think he, because of the body language that you had round 1, not consciously, but that he maybe thought he already won?
I think anybody playing me would think that they already won from that. So there might have been some of that, he thought he had it in the bag and he was just here to clean up.
Right.
It very well could have been that. And so, you kind of get a little over zealous of moving things off to just try to bottleneck me in somewhere. But again, it's not going to work when I can teleport out of it. Especially with Blister Skin, I'm getting extra movement. I'm flying. Basically, my entire army is flying. So there's a lot of that, and then also having to keep track of, did I summon something? Did I not summon something? So it's like, okay, well, I got more bodies now, and this sort of thing. So, yeah, I think that was a challenge for him. I think he saw victory in sight. So he's like, I got this, and then it went, what the hell? Because I've been in that same position. I just talked about it at LVO. I went playing a Nighthawk player. I was like, I got this, I won. And then like at next turn, I'm like, where the fuck did all my models go? When I was playing Nate. So that was fun. But yeah, it was a hard game. It was really, really tough, and I ultimately didn't kill a whole lot. I just had to outmaneuver, and I think I got one Vermin Lord down, perhaps. I don't even know if I did that. No, I didn't kill Thankful or anything like that. So it was just I was able to outmaneuver him as best I could.
So,
and that was the game.
How many, Nick, of the 5 games you played? How many were the clock?
So Seraphon was almost the clock. I actually we were pausing when we were rolling off for turn, but we would forget to put it back on. So if that was the case, I mathed it out that I would have clocked him as well. So it would have only been those 2, and then when we look at the rest of them, Sylvaneth was close, but not quite there. Again, similar problem, not hit and play. But that is, when we talk about that one, that's for a different reason. And then in my last game, we didn't even need a clock, really.
Okay.
Iron Jaws and me, that's super quick.
So how many did you actually put a clock down?
All of them. I always put a clock down.
Okay.
Because I've resolved, and I mentioned this to one of the guys that I was playing LVO with, is that it's nothing personal, it's just, it is what it is, and you kind of have to, in these sort of situations, you need to protect yourself as well. If someone's going to play long, then you need to be able to manage that. And I also think that there's an element that you add to a clock. It's a time pressure to it, where I know, and I was on the receiving end of that, which I learned. I was like, wow, that's a powerful tool when you're...
Yeah. So if you know your army well...
Yeah. Exactly, it's really powerful. And they're like, okay, it's your go, and you're like, and you see a timer going down, and then also when it starts to get low on time, people start to make mistakes and that thing. And yes, I get it. People don't like to win that way, but remember, we're at a Masters tournament. We're playing in Worlds. We're playing in Team Start. This is a really high level of competition. So with these added elements in there, I think it's a really useful tool. And that was one of the big...
It shouldn't even have to be for a competitive event. Like, it just guarantees both players get like 1.5 hour gaming time. Like, if you walk up to a table and you see 240 zombies...
Exactly, right? Yeah. And that was one of the good lessons that I got when we were in Luxembourg. I was playing the German team captain, and he was like, "Time is a resource. Use it. It's part of your army list here. Is you got to take your time with it. I've got 30 minutes left. I'm going to spend every single one of them. So you just have to be mindful of that. So I actually really enjoy playing with the clock. I think, and it's not to be like power gamey.
No, you're not.
It's element of the game for me now.
You're not that kind of player. I guess the reason I'm asking is that I didn't use it a single time in this because my army plays really quickly. Like, all I have to do is teleport to the everything I want to shoot. I do that. I shoot. We see what happens, and then I repeat and rinse and repeat. Like, I have, honestly, I used to think that KO's shooting phase was super long. If you know the profiles of your guns, it's actually not long at all. It goes by super quickly because nothing ends up happening. And then most of it's the movement phase.
You didn't play Thunder, so.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, at least the boats have similar profiles. But anyway, I didn't have a single clock, and none of my games got really particularly crazy long. Nothing like when I was playing Tzeentch Guild of Summoners. Okay, so my second.
If you're going for Lumineth, I would really play your. I think this is a remark to everyone playing. If you want to play at events, just play your own games on a clock. You don't have to if he clocks out, you don't have to screw him over and then say "Oh, that's just safe for you, my buddy," from across the street.
Yeah.
But if you teach yourself to play within that 1.5 hour time limit, you won't ever have an issue at an event anymore, whether you play with a clock or not. And you know that if you're starting to run out of time, it's probably not you.
Right. No, I totally agree. And Lumineth is complicated, especially in that hero phase. So
yes,
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to just move on to the next one. I could talk about this for hours with you guys. I played against our buddy Dawa. Dawa is unquestionably one of my... Him and Paul van der Weide are my two most frequent tournament opponents. This is my third time playing against Dawa, and I think I've covered all of them on these channels, on these channel reports. But Dawa was playing Ogres with the Iron Blasters and then Stonehorn Battle Line build. It was a super close game. It did not work out in his favor. I ended up pulling a 12-8, so the opposite of what I did the first time. But you just keep removing these threats, and then by the time you know it, he doesn't have much else to respond with. But he was a little bit more flexible getting around the board with his deep strike from a Yeti, I think it was, or something like that. Maybe it wasn't a Yeti, it was the other thing that ogres have. They can do a deep strike. But in any case, the Gorger, exactly. And any case, every time Dawa and I end up playing against each other, we have a good time. He's such a good-hearted person. And that's what I mean. Like, this game was actually the most tense game I've had in a long time, even though it had nothing to do with the person I was playing against. Like, he was lovely the whole time, yet we both agreed we hadn't been that stressed out in a long time. And I think that goes to show something about what I mean about you can go in competitive, you can go in really hard playing this game, but if you have no emotional empathy for what the other person across the table is like, you're going to make it worse for a maybe 3.5 hour experience than it needs to be. We all spend all this time painting and learning all the rules and trying to be competitive, and then if you stand across someone and you just end up hating your time, no one's having a good time there. Like, what's the point? And it goes back to the make 5 friends, not 5-0. I'd love to do 5-0, don't get me wrong, but I would rather play one of the tensest games I've had in a year against a good guy like Dawa than the other way around. So that's just my short summary of that game, but that was the big takeaway. And by the way, I keep records of all the tournaments I've played, and one of the little things I like to keep tagged onto each one of those records is what my favorite thing about the tournament was. And sometimes it's a thing like this. Playing against Dawa in our first tournament ever was my favorite thing that tournament, too. So I think if you can make that kind of memory from a tournament, going back to what we talked about earlier, that sticks with you way longer than how you performed or, you know, what the competitive vibe was in general. Tom, for example, in Bloodstorm, my favorite thing was hanging out with you that evening when we were roommates for that evening. So that ends up superseding all the tournaments.
Stealing my man, my werewolf.
Oh my God, he didn't see how hairy I was. I don't think, but maybe he did. I don't remember.
Oh boy,
the lights were out. All right,
I don't recall. As long as I didn't keep you up with my snoring.
No, it was good. It was good. So it was nothing like the hot water kettle that was keeping me up the one time I stayed in Eindhoven with Nick. All right.
Yes.
Nick,
story for another time.
Let's go on to your game with Roel Koemeester with his Gits army.
Gits! This was a slam dunk for the Feck, mostly due to the bravery. So my shooting, being able to be outside of 9, it didn't really come into play here with the Squig herd or anything like that. But I was able to range and really, he charged in unit of Trogos and I just shot him off the board, or Fellwater, shot him off the board with my Unleash Hell. It was just, it was brutal of what I was able to do. And then Pylon fight twice. They were just getting annihilated. I think we went 2 or 3 rounds. And then I was able to get my dragon over to his shrine, crushed it. So he lost his grand strategy. This was a really favorable matchup for me. I didn't know what to expect because of the new book. And I think also on Roel's side, his challenge was he had some pretty poor magic phases going on because he didn't get any of his teleports off, so he wasn't really able to get his Trogs in my face when he wanted to. And so I kind of had free reign of the board, and by that time I had taken over everything and denied so many points that it was done by that point, and now I was just going to clean up. He may have gotten some dragons or something like that, but I got everything in that I needed to be able to secure a victory. So that was probably my fastest game in the tournament.
Wait, so
but it was fun.
How did the Trogs not survive with all the healing they're doing these days?
They were dead.
They never got a chance. You just
No,
did he have units of
one-shotted them, yeah.
Did he have units of 3 or 6? Because I feel like 6 is really hard to lift.
It was Fellwaters that charged, and were lifted on the charge.
Okay.
And then the other Trogs, they made it to a round of combat, and then my Flayers knocked them out.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
You know,
they were spicy.
You know, Tom, it's worth pointing out that Rule had he sat with us when we were having dinner that night, at a Saturday night, and when you guys met the lady and everything, and we were all joking, and I feel like Rule might have gotten a little in over his head with the sense of humor that the three of us have together, especially you and Nick. He was like, "What the fuck are these guys talking about?" Like the kinds of jokes that were going back and forth. Where you guys were both on one.
Most of the restaurant thought that.
Yeah.
Except the guy behind you who was trying to harass
Yeah,
you.
he grabbed my titties. That was interesting.
Yeah. All right. So my third game here was Stormcast. My last game of day one was Stormcast playing against Braum, and I'd never played against Braum before, but this actually proved to be my my favorite matchup of the whole thing. Even though I lost, it was another 8-12 game. He had the kind of Reign of Stars light version that was kind of going on here, where he had 3 Knight Vexillors with the once per game area of effect mortal wounds thing. He had Judicator units as battle line, and he had a Knight Judicator that also has a once per game area of effect, plus some pretty spicy shooting. And then 5 Chariots, not the shooting kind, for the impact hits, and then a little bit better melee. This was one of those games, kind of like, Nick, what you were just saying with your Skaven game, where maybe I actually started out really strong and I really thought I was going to pull this one out. It did come down to how it played out. This is the one that had the side objectives that fall out, if I'm not mistaken. It was also super close. Like, this tournament was one of very close games that are kind of keep your heart bumping for me the whole time. And it sounds like to Nick, you might have had a bunch of those yourself, games that were pretty close, from what I know of your Ironjawz game and maybe even the Sylvaneth game. But you said the Gitz one was a little bit one-sided. But
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd never really talked before, Braum and myself, and we had such a good time hanging that this ended up becoming kind of like the highlight of my new friends made at a tournament in recent past. But yeah, I'm looking forward to playing him again. Tom, what do you think of a list like this, the 5 Chariots, this kind of build? Does it have legs? Is it the kind of thing that ends up winning in the long run, or is it more of a matchup dependent kind of list?
So first of all, Braum is someone that will always bring like a little bit off meta list, mostly Stormcast, but always like a little bit different. He played the Paladins before, like the Retributors and stuff like that, in the previous book a lot. So that's always fun to see. I think like the Chariots are pretty tanky and they can do a lot of damage, but I just think you might struggle a little bit on primaries. And he was very, very elite. So yeah, not sure, but I think that list is a blast to play with, to be honest. So yeah, it looked cool on the table.
Yeah, oh for sure. And we had a good time. I mean, like I said, he pulled out a win there, even though I alphaed him pretty hard. And whenever I end up alphaing someone pretty hard with a shooting list, I always end up apologizing for it. I've played against Rob Hoofknuckle, and we've had a couple of those games where I just removed everything in like a Nurgle list way too early, and I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy.
Zinch, I think.
Yeah, with Zinch and with a Stormcast Dragons list once, and I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy, you came all the way over here, and like, let me at least get lunch for you. and if anytime that happens at a tournament, I always feel like I need to get him a beer. But Braum ended up pulling it out on this one. I was like, well, never mind. I retract I didn't actually offer the beer, but there's a certain amount of like, well, you won anyway, so no pity party here. But yeah. Anyway, Nick, how often do you end up buying drinks for someone at a tournament? Is that your move, or is that just with me?
Yeah, I think that might just be with you. I mean,
Yeah, I buy you drinks.
this one, you guys were fueling me a little bit more than usual, because my games were lasting way too long, except for one. But yeah, we have our usual posse like that just walks around and see if anybody doesn't have a beer, they just fill up the team. So
right.
At some point, I usually on day 2, I never don't have a drink in my hand because people are either like keeping me alive from the night before, or getting ready for the night of.
Yeah. Okay, so day 2, you started.
Yes.
You started fresh with a very difficult matchup for you. Anyone that's following, you've played against Mitchell de Boer, who ended up winning the tournament before, and then you ended up playing at LVO a Sylvaneth list as what was your last game? It was pretty uphill battle-y.
Yes.
And here you
They
are.
were the same list, actually.
Yeah, and so the last time we talked about a tournament, which we have not published yet, so this will be a little bit after the fact, but we already talked about this one a little bit, that you had said you learned the lessons of the past, the sins of the past here, and applied them to this game with Mitchell. So walk us through that real quick.
Yeah, so like at LVO, I played this exact same list, and it got absolutely crushed by it. I underestimated or didn't really know how to screen trees well, or really understand the need to do it before it was too late. So understanding that, getting a couple practice games in before on TTS with Mitch. Mitchell. That's his name. So we played a while, and then in this game, I pretty much knew I wasn't gonna win. But my goal here was to really make using trees and spells and all that really, really difficult. And then also, in doing that, make it difficult for Durthu, because then he's limited to overgrowns rather than going through trees. So before the game started, I had a slight upper hand because, as we mentioned, Tom was dying. But then I see Mitchell stumbling in as well, and I went, "Oh boy, here we go." So he was not in the best of shape for the game. So I was just gassing him up the whole time, just like being wild and whatnot. So we had a very high-low energy game. And then we would take breaks to laugh at Tom, who was hiding behind the table. Ultimately, I did very, very well with my goal, and it ended up being that he didn't drop his free tree that he's able to get until turn 4, because it just didn't make sense. Wow. So, mission accomplished for me. I was hanging in there. There was a moment where I was like, could I? And I needed a Hail Mary charge, and I also needed the turn. So there was a lot that I was just kind of going for it. If that went my way, maybe. Could have done it, but it didn't, and it wasn't like a total stomp, and I walked away really happy with what I did. And also, Mitchell is a teammate, so I was also super happy to see him keep going. So either way, one of us was going to be 4-0 after this game, so that was pretty cool. It was a really, really fun game, and then, yeah, I'm starting to not consider these slam dunks anymore, whereas before I would have, because Mitchell's a great player, and he really understands the workings of this list and really knows how to master his movements and time it and all that. So if I was to face it, let's say with someone not at level, I think the results could be different. So I don't think that this is an auto lose for me anymore with Feck. Not that it really matters, but that was a good walk away from that. I was really happy with that game.
Sure. Yeah.
Mitchell's also a great guy to lose to.
It was such a fun game. Winner. Yeah, such a fun game. Yeah. So Tom, I was teasing him with anytime he opened his mouth, I put the clock on him just to mess with him. And he's like,
"Oh." So Tom, while we're on the topic, and we can shortchange the end of this to say that Mitch won this event, as I already mentioned. Mm-hmm. But why don't we talk a little bit about why this list works so well from your perspective, having seen what the meta was? What is it? What's the secret sauce here? Is it the list itself? Is it Mitch? Do you have to have both to make this list work? Do you have to have a good captain or a good pilot to make it work? What are we looking at here?
Well, we're done. Thanks. I
I think it's all of those points really, because Oakenbrow might not be. If you look at the book, Oakenbrow might not be the strongest subfaction, but in the hands of a good pilot, it can get battle tactics pretty easily. It can get across the board easily. And if some things have to go off, like you have to have with the Hive and the Battle Mage, if those two both land and they go off, you can't really hide from it. And he's very good at trading, so he can like pump up his ancient or his Juthu, whatever, send it over, grab something, and then just teleport, fuck off back to his own side. And you can't trade with his units. So I think a lot of lists will struggle into this. And like I said, it's great at getting battle tactics. It's great at getting the GCs around the board, because the Warsong and the Archrev are both GCs, and they can teleport, wherever they want. And obviously the Warsong can just like sit back a little bit and throw the spells, throw her spells around. So it's a hard list to pilot well. But if it's a good pilot, it's very hard to counterplay it, which you saw because he went 5-0, and he also won the GT at Bloodstone 2 weeks prior with the previous GHB. Yep. So I think it's the list in the hands of Mitchell is just very good.
That brings up an interesting point, that both of these tournaments have had different prioritizing elements for how you win. One being points and the other one being win-loss, and then the second one is the other one is the alternative option. And he won at both of them. Do you think that must say something, right, about the quality of the player and the list he brought? That you can win.
He went 4-1 at Bloodstorm.
Interesting. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but he did win it. So that's. I wanted to say problem. That's not really the correct term, but that's the. That's where the difference lies.
But did anyone get a 5-0 at Bloodstorm?
Yulna, perhaps.
Okay.
Yulna, I think Yulna maybe did a 5-0, because Yulna's the person I think who beat Mitchell.
Okay.
And I think he went 5-0, but he just didn't score enough points. His games were too close.
Yeah.
I think the winner was 80-something points with the painting points, probably.
Okay.
Not sure. I'd have to check. But so that means if you go 20-0 3 times and then lose 2 games very close, you win the event.
Yeah.
So he went 4-1 and 1, and at our event you have to go 5-0. I think it's just my personal opinion that if someone goes unbeaten, they should just win the event.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks volumes that a guy can take the same list to 2 events with 2 different GHBs, go 9-1 and win both events.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I noticed about this list is that it's super unforgiving to your opponent that may not know or remember all the lists. And I think one of the biggest ones is the Tree Lords. That not being able to pile in is massive.
Yeah, you just saw it.
Yeah, and that's what won him his game is that. And so if you're not paying attention to that, this list or not, so you not even that you don't know that rule exists, but if you make mistakes on this list punishes you tenfold.
Yes.
It's really unforgiving for messing that up. So like I was saying, like if I left a gap for that tree, he was going to hit everything. So you really cannot make mistakes when you play against it. So I think it's equal parts there. Like if you really pilot this well, it's really going to come down to does your opponent also know how to counter it as best they can. So it's a really interesting way to play.
And the list itself is also not very forgiving to play, because if you accidentally charge out of range of your trees,
exactly, yeah,
and one of your, because he only has 2 real hammers. Of course, a Warsong can do damage, and the loose Tree Lords can do some damage as well. But it's mostly Durthu and the Ancient. If he loses them early on, if one of if you play this list, you're in trouble. So it's a combination of the 2 things.
Nobody could be making mistakes.
No, not against him or with him. It's like I think with the Elon Teclis build, it's the same thing. I think some lists, I think in 3.0 are paper thin anyway. Like we're much more elite. Points are going up. Units that cost 240 points now would probably be like 180 in AOS 2.0, I feel. Which makes it fun because you have to paint less model on the table, unless you're playing certain armies. But It also means your lists are thin. You have your roles for your units, and you don't really have a lot of extra chaff going around.
Yep.
So skill level goes up.
Right. All right. So my fourth game was against Nard, who is a known.
Spiders.
What's that? Yeah, spiders.
Spiders.
He's a known entity in our community as one of the friendliest guys. I think he's won a number of sportsmanship awards. He's a lovely dude, and he just had a kid recently, so he'd been a little bit out of the tournament scene for a moment, and then we just had this Gits book come around, and I think he just wanted to bring these spiders and see how it did. I think everyone knows that the spiders are the most overcosted thing in that book, which is an undercosted book, but not the spiders. So I feel like Nard had an uphill battle for him going into this. I just kept wiping out his spiders really early on, and this was my biggest win of the tournament by far, in an otherwise close or super in the next game, super 20-0'd version where I got just my ass handed to me. But the funny thing is my Warp Lightning Vortex ended up doing more damage to me than it did to him over multiple turns, including killing my Arcanaut Admiral in the boat, because I had to keep staying within range to get my other things I wanted to do, and I just kept getting nailed by the Warp Lightning Vortex. So it's kind of how it works out, but I still ended up pulling out a healthy win on this one, and I had a lovely first game ever with Nard, even though I've known him as a friend and played on a team with him in Austin Brook last year. So it was a nice game. Not too much else to say about that other than I feel like I've got this kind of running checklist of people that I'd love to play games with, and we live too far away or our lives are too busy, and then tournaments are one of my only ways to play these people, and if I get to finally check them off at a tournament, it's like it's a really good feel-good, regardless of how the game turns out. Nick, strangely enough, you and I have never played at a tournament, even though we've played 20-something games together. So
Right.
I think, Ryan, we've never played.
No, we've just played at a tournament when you were doing the Bretonia list when you were playing slaves with Kai's Bretonia.
Oh, yeah, the doubles.
Yeah,
sure.
That's the only time. But we need to make that happen, too. So, last game of the tournament. Nick, you played against a very lovely person, and I know this game was an emotional one of sorts. Care to share with us how the Iron Jaws matchup went?
Yes. So this game was a long time coming. It's one of those ones that I've always wanted to do. So this was playing against Mr. Sportsman himself, Neil. And so, yeah, at every tournament we always find each other like hanging. He's part of the beer posse that keeps us all refueled. And so we always hope that we get matched up with each other. And then a lot of the times when we're dropped out in the sense of like we're not going to place or come anywhere near it, we'll like, well, let's just tell Tom to just drop us out so we could play each other. But we never actually pulled the trigger on it. We always just say that we're going to. We were joking around at lunch. We're like, oh, we kind of got the same score. Maybe we'll get paired up finally. And then, lo and behold, we did. We scared everyone in the lunchroom because we screamed like girls. I was like, ah! And so it was super great.
That scared you almost with repairing?
Yeah, he was, we're going to repair it. I was like, don't do this. Come on, don't. Stop it. So we managed to get matched up. And then when we went upstairs, we came prepared. We had our drinks. We were ready to go. And it was fun to watch how quickly we turned into like gaming mode. It was like, okay, we're on. And we're playing, but it was still super fun and light energy of like just we hugged it out before and all this kind of stuff. And then yeah, when we got into it, it was a really good game. I mean, Neil knows Iron Jaws like the back of his hand. It was really fun to watch him play it. And then but he was kind of looking at me like the way I was like corner whoring a little bit, and I was like, yeah, you can come at me if you want. And then so he was just hesitant. He's like, I don't know what to do. I've never played against you and your feck. I don't know what you're waiting. I was like, and that's why I do this. And I'm just like staring at him with like this creepy smile the whole time just to get inside his head. And then we had a good rounds of back and forth, and then the time came, and the whole game I was going, you got a wah for me, man. If you're gonna do it, I want to like hear it. I want to feel it in my bones. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to do it. So he takes a swig of his beer, and he's like, ramp it up. And he drags this on for like 2 minutes. I was clocking him. So, and then he gets it, and he finally like clears his throat and goes, wah. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard in my life. And then so I gave him a bunch of shit. I was like, if you don't do it, I'm gonna do it. He was like, I can't, I'm too embarrassed. So then, by the time he hit the D on embarrassed, I had let out the biggest wad that I've ever done in my life.
On a TO table,
Yeah. So it was the person next to me was rolling dice, and he threw his dice in the air because he wasn't ready for it. Scared the shit out of him. And then I was talking to a friend who was not even inside. They were outside the venue and like, yeah, we heard you yelling. What was that all about? So I lost my voice almost immediately after it. So it was totally worth it.
I looked at your table and one split second I thought, did those motherfuckers switch armies?
That would have been great. He would have been screwed. I would have been fine because I also play her. But yeah, so we got to where it all came down to it was he was going to try and clear me off the board. He had his Rogue Idol in there. His Maw Crusher was in there. He had some pigs and whatever. And he decided to fight first with his pigs. And I was, in my head, I'm like, fair enough. So he does that. And, doesn't kill the unit of ghouls. Let that one sink in. And so then what happens is he has his Maw Crusher charged in and his Rogue Idol into my 9 block of flares. So I've then pivot the charge. So I go in a perfect diagonal, and these are in Galician veterans, so they're getting fight in 2 rings. And so I get that, and I just lay into the Maw Crusher. I get him almost about halfway. And then he's like, okay, whew, and I was like, no. Feeding frenzy, my friend. And then so I do it again and knock the Maw Crusher out. And he was like, what did I just do? Because he realized he just threw everything away because of just picking the wrong unit to start fighting. And that ended up costing him the game. And the whole time he was just like, fuck you, and your fucking fuck you, like forever. And I was like, I text him still, like, does it still haunt you? Just, because he just couldn't let it go. It was really fun. We hugged it out. We had a great game. And it was a blast. It was one of the best games that I've had in a long time. It was a lot of fun. And it was also a long time coming. So Neil, if you're listening, I apologize again. And yeah, it is what it is.
And for those that don't know, Neil was one of the guys, or the guy who was running one of the tournaments I've covered before, in the White Scars tournament, where I played Guild of Summoners for the second time. So, or first time actually. So anyway, Neil is lovely, and he also puts on a good tournament. So that's another TO in our community. Yeah. All right, so closing us out, I played against Thomas, who is Frenchman who's been living in Arnhem in the Netherlands for at least 8 years. Lovely guy. I really enjoy hanging out with him. And the first time we played was at Tom's last big tournament, which was the Teams tournament, where he brought Sylvaneth, and my Tzeentch list just totally denied the... Well, didn't totally. It was actually a pretty close game. But ended up denying the Warsong Bomb and all the other stuff that it wanted to do. And at the time, he was pretty salty. And so I resolved with him before we started this game, because I'd already lost to Cabalists with 10 Knights, or with Knights and Warriors and Varangard in this tournament. I was like, look, I just want to have a good game, and I really think you're awesome as a person, so let's have a good game. And he absolutely destroyed me. I gave up within 2 turns and said, let's just go get beers. And this is when, so we go get beers, and about 15 minutes later, Nick and Neil walk in, bitching. Neil's bitching about how the rolls didn't work out for him, and he made the thing didn't work out, and then the whole thing, and then I'm just like, by that point, Tomas and I had already moved on to just talking about life, and you guys were still talking about Warhammer for the next 45 minutes. And in the last game of a tournament like this, I don't want to talk about Warhammer anymore. You know, I'm like ready to move on to like real stuff, but you guys were all about it. So anyway, that's how the tournament ended. And it ended with all of us that are here. Tom obviously was busy working with his stuff, closing out the tournament. Tom, at the end of this tournament, what kind of stuff did you have to do? And were you sober yet? Were you inebriated at this point enough to enjoy the rest of the end of the tournament, as it were? It seemed like you were in good spirits by the end.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, there was 2 things. Like I drank too much, but I'm over exaggerating a little bit, because I think I got something from the food. Like the food at the venue was great, but I think something didn't feel right. I think Nick had the same thing.
Yeah,
the day before. was probably the chicken or something. It
Yeah,
didn't
it's a
feel
bit
right.
of greasy chicken.
Yeah, because I didn't have a headache. Like sometimes when you get like a very bad hangover, you have like a little bit of cold sweat or something. But I actually had a fever, and like my let's just say my tummy was very active. So I think it was a combination of just being actually sick, because I was sick for Monday and Tuesday after the event. I was like a fever, puking in my bed. So I think it was a combination of some stuff. But Hank gave me the drugs, so I was feeling completely fine actually after lunch. So last round I had 0 issues, and during the award ceremony the same. So at the end we just obviously we have to do the scoring, and this time it was actually pretty exciting because 2 guys were on the same points, and strength of schedule would decide who won. So I quickly closed off the end results so that nobody could like do some calculating themselves. And then Paul and Mitchell, I saw them like sitting on different ends of the room, and they were both just looking at me and Jeffrey like trying to like body language in their mind. So we were busy with that, and obviously like checking who won best sports, which was Nick. Spoiler alert. Which obviously I couldn't let him get away with it that easily. So he first won the Best Death Award. I made him walk all the way down to us to receive it, and then asked him to sit down so I could continue to ask him to come forward again for the next one. So that was fun from my end. But so yeah, what we do is we check the scores, we check the sportsmanship voting, we check the painting stuff. We make sure everything's lined up so we can do the ceremony and everyone can go home and we can clean up. And unfortunately, the guys who supply the awards to us, they might have boxed the awards wrongly, or something wasn't right. But the bottom 2 awards got completely shattered when we opened them, which was the best painted award and the 3rd place award for 40K. So we ended up shipping those awards later, like a week after. But I think other than that, it went pretty smooth. I think we also do a raffle. I think that took a little bit too long, perhaps, but it was also too long because they did the 40K stuff first. So for the AWOD players, it was extra long. But for me, it's the moment where like we close off the event, and yeah, it's just a great feeling for me as a TO. When the first round starts, and when we do like the sign off for the award ceremony are moments that where I think this is why the reason I'm TOing and gives me a lot of energy. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so I've gone ahead and moved on to the conclusion slide here where we talk about the tournament results and prizes because Nick, you did end up getting 2 awards there. Were you expecting to get best sportsmanship? Have you ever gotten that before?
No, that one was a surprise. Yeah, that they were teasing me there because I knew I had pretty much known I was going to get best in fact or whatever. I was going to get the best Death Army just because there was, like you saw in the beginning, there's only 5 of them, and then just some number that I was at. But no, I did not expect best sportsman. That's a new one for me, but it just capped off a nice feeling because like this was the tournament that I probably had the most fun at, and it was probably the silliest, like combined with like doing dumb shit like yelling wah and the dinner that we had where I was just being an ass in general. It was just kind of fun, and then just mingling with everyone, and then like it was just such a high spirit. And then I had great games. A lot of my opponents there we were just joking around, having a lot of fun, like with Mitchell, for example, and then to then have it come back and be like, yeah, you were the best sportsman. I was like, oh, well, that's a nice surprise that it wasn't bugging people. They were also enjoying the energy. Like, it was fun. It wasn't just fun for me.
Right.
So that was a nice, yeah, had a good time with that.
Yeah. So, future goals. I could talk about my own situation here. I'm, like I mentioned, I'm playing this obvious Lumineth list with the spell portal removed, which makes Teclis a little less punchy. And Tom, I'm sure you're probably aware, but this channel originally started as a Lumineth channel, so everyone here that's listening is a good chunk of the people are very aware of that kind of list. Do you see legs with that list moving forward, or do you think it's just kind of I mean, Paul Poissy ended up doing second place. Yeah, the Helon list, yeah.
The Helon Teclis build, yes. So right now, in my opinion, the Helon Teclis build is the best singular list in the game. But with the battle scroll coming out right in front of the rules cutoff for Worlds, with the list doing this well, it's also scary to invest into it as a new army. For, like, if I'm speaking from your behalf, you're going to have to learn this army. It's a pretty hard army to pilot well, so it's going to take reps. And with the battle scroll coming up, could be dangerous. But I think that goes for every very well performing army right now. But Helon is pretty thin. You only have like 6, maybe 7 units. Some builds, depending on if you do the 20/20 Sentinels or the 20/10/10. So there's not a lot of space to wiggle around with. But the army itself, it's insanely good.
Yeah. So I ended up playing, my first game was against Mathieu, actually, and he had the Croak build, and I ended up winning quite decently, despite the fact that we kept negating each other's magic. And I didn't have Spell Portal. I feel like it pilots itself pretty well, and the good news is that I'm used to shooting armies that castle, so it's kind of leaning into things I like, and the amount of choices you have in your hero phase feels pretty comfortable for me, with having playing Tzeentch and even KO's movement phase. There's a lot of thinking involved in the one phase, and I'm okay with that. The real question is whether I will want to keep playing it moving forward with the new KO book. I definitely going to give it a shot in the interim between having to decide for Worlds and playing Osnabrück. And I think there might be some legs. But Nick, moving on to your thing, and this connects in a way, there's a really good chance, and Tom, I'd like to hear your opinion on this too, there's a really good chance Gitz is going to get some version of a nerf between now and 3 months from now. Now the question is, will that nerf come at all? Will it come in time for the World's cutoff? Or if it doesn't come in time for the World's cutoff, but it does come shortly thereafter, how much of an unfair advantage does that give to teams that chose to play the super heavy hitting Gitz list at Worlds that just snuck under the cutoff? So whoever wants to answer that, you both are kind of in that situation.
Well, Nick's the Gitz player here, so.
Yeah. Well, I'm very new to the Gitz playing, so yeah, I'm worried about a couple things. So I'm worried about changes from the battle scrolls, and also any upcoming books that may just hard counter me right now. The main strat with the Gitz, for me that I've played it, I've had good success with it, but I do see some very blatant weak spots that can counter it pretty easily if you know what to do and how to do it. So I do think that once this gets a little bit more visible, like more tournaments, that the jig is up, right? People are like, okay, yeah, I know what you're going to do. And the problem with this, and this is like kind of the argument that I hear about slaves as well, is like when you play like those kind of trick armies, your opponent knows what you're going to do, and they can plan for that pretty easily. And so let's not play lists like that, because I like to have a tool belt of things that I can do, doesn't mean things that I must do. Whereas if I play a list that's geared to one action, like Iron Jaws and Alpha Charging or Alpha Strike and all that stuff, people expect that. They know what you're going to do. There it is. So I'm trying to find a way to play these lists and play this army in a way that people aren't going to, even if they do make the assumption, I want them to assume the wrong thing. So then when I don't play into that, they're kind of like, okay, weird. Now I have to think about what you're going to do. I don't like playing a predictable game. It's not really my forte. So I really haven't found the best way to do that yet, but that's what I'm working on.
Sure. So, I mean, in a similar way, if we want to extend that logic, the Lumineth list, this net list that I'm currently adopting, that Tom just said might be one of the strongest lists we've got, is very predictable in what it can do, what it wants to do, and yet it still is a very strong list. Is that, Tom, does that have a clock on it before everyone kind of figures out the code on what you have to do to solve it? Or is it just that the GW has made something that's skewed and that needs balancing?
Well, it definitely is skewed, but I think the difference is between what Nick just mentioned and what you're mentioning is everyone knows what Luminate does, but the problem with Iron Jaws or Gits or Slaves is you know what it does, and you can. It's pretty easy. Easy is not the good word. You can easily see how one could counter it. I'm not saying that every list can counter it, but if you wanted to build your list in such a way, then you could. The Heal on Tackless list has so many things that will actually make your opponent not play the game. Total Eclipse, the Castellar spell, the other spell that lets you roll above the bravery and stop the movement. It's very hard to do something against it. I played against it last night with Lex, practice against it, and I played against Nick's Gits list, I think 2 days prior. And the difference was in both matchups, Archeon was very important. In Nick, I made a deployment mistake, a big one, which cost me the game. I think against Lex, he got the double and he spiked insanely hard and killed Archeon to the wound. If he did not, he would have been. I think he would have lost that game pretty badly. In the end, he won with like a couple points only. But against Nick, I made a mistake, but against Nick, I knew what to do. I had to get my Archeon close to his hoppers, and he'd be in big trouble because he'd have no Inspiring Presence. And then, it was going to be a problem for him. Against the Helon list, what happened was the Castellar got her spell off. Archeon is Bravery 10. Alex managed to roll it twice above my Bravery, and I couldn't do anything.
Yeah. So
I knew what to do. It just didn't work because he just hard countered it. And like with Total Eclipse, I couldn't get my all-out defense off. I couldn't get this. I couldn't get the redeploy off because I just wasn't able to spend CP. So it's very hard to counter. It's the same with Siege. Like everyone knows, but you know what Siege is going to do. But it's very hard to stop because like in turn 5 they can still auto run a hero, clamp down a unit of pinks, blues, or whatever, auto charge onto your objective, and that's it. There's not a lot of things you can do about it because your list will be thinned out, your army, and that's the difference with Iron Jaws and Gits. They are early game armies that will try to do a certain thing, and if they are able to do it, you're probably dead, and if you have something against it, they're going to have a big problem, and that's not the case for Siege or Luminate, even though everyone knows what it does, because they're late game armies.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. Those are really good additions, I think, to the perspective on it. I guess part of the question is also the Gits element. Do you feel like Gits is going to end up getting some points hikes at least to make it so that it's not just randomly cheap for really strong units? For example, some of the cheap heroes that cost like 80 points do the same output in combat as a Stormcast hero for no good reason. We're talking about like 5 attacks, 3s, -1, 2 damage.
Yeah. I think that's not even the problem. It's just the buff stack.
Yeah.
So the buffs in the Gits army are so cheap that you can get them all. Like Slaves have some great buffs. Feck has great buffs. Iron Jaws has great buffs. But it's hard to fit them all in one list. Like you want the Ghoul King, you want the Arteries to get like +4 attacks in some situations.
Yeah.
But it's hard to fit them all in one list. And the Gits at this moment with the current point costs, they can get it all. They might not get it in a 1-drop, but they can still get it all. And I think that's the real issue. Like I think Hoppers could and Squigger could use Little Rays. On the other hand, the boss on the Mangler Squig might be a little too expensive, but I think it's mostly the points on Scragrod, the Squig boss with the mount with the Squig, and just the buff pieces in general, the Gobblepalooza, the Spore Splatters.
Yeah,
they're just a little too cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. My point was less about the actual attack, because I agree with you. They're not going to get in combat too often. What I mean is more GW got a little fast and loose with their rules in general, including the price, the points. And they're not really paying too close attention to the details here, where they've been pretty strict leading up to this about units getting costed.
For sure, I think all the 3.0 books have been spot on so far. Like when Nurgle came out, everyone's like, "This book's not very good." Then it ended up having the highest win rate for the longest time, 3.0 of all the books. But it wasn't like the fly list was pretty impressive. But I think the book itself, points-wise, pretty well done. Slaves is pretty well done. Some things are a little bit overcosted, but mostly it's well done. Lumineth, even though Helon is very strong, I think it's just a minor tweak here and there. Zinch is the same. I think the books have been really good, and this Gitz was really an outlier in where, you know, the book came out, the abilities were good, which every book has, but you know, you're writing lists and then you're like, oh, I can just do everything. Okay. And that's not really in style with how they wrote the previous books, or how the previous books ended up being power level wise.
Right. So, closing out, guys, this has been lovely. This is actually one of my favorite videos we've done to date. Tom, I'm really glad to have you on the channel, and I look forward to having you here again at some point. Not only do you have a lot of experience behind you, but you're also a good friend, and you add a lot to the conversation. Nick, thank you again, of course, for being here. The channel recognizes you at this point. You were an LVO, and everyone, well, this one guy that met you already knew who you were, which is pretty crazy. Nick, Tom, do you guys have anything you want to add at the end here before we close out?
Just that this was, like I said, the best one so far. It was a lot of fun. Had a great time. Really good energy. So thanks, Tom, for setting it up. It was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for having me. To be honest, I enjoyed my time as well. And indeed, if you want to have me on in the future, I'd be happy to jump on and you know, rant a little more.
Yeah, for 100%. I don't think it's going to be a question of when, if. It's just going to be a win. So, in conclusion, guys, thanks again for watching. Of course, do all the normal YouTube deals. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that. Find us in the Discord if you want to continue the chat, or down in the comments where I'm a little more active. Jonas is more active in the Discord. Thanks again to Tom and Nick. And I know we're a little behind right now, but we'll get this video out sooner than later, of course. By the time you're hearing this, it's already happened. And we'll have more. There's the KO book will either have been right before this or right after this, including my conclusion to my Math Hammer, Everything You Want to Know About D6 series will be coming out soon as well. Thanks again, guys, and until the next time, Ryan out.